afternoon, everyone. As was mentioned, since the last time we were together to talk about to do a legislative update, really not a whole lot has happened in terms of bill movement. There was a little bit of a break in the legislative action last week, and prior to that, it was pretty much several days for those actions. So what you'll see in the spreadsheet, as Dr. Connolly mentioned, what you'll see is pretty much an updated list of the bills that, of course, are relevant to Wake County Public Schools, and all the bills that were filed previously that we discussed. There's been virtually no action. So now that bill filing deadline is passed, what we have come, the next big hurdle or big deadline on the legislative process is what they call crossover. And we've mentioned that several times in previous meetings. Essentially, legislative crossover is the mechanism by which legislators will consider bills filed in, that have been filed that are not that are strictly policy bills. In other words, bills that are not appropriations bills or finance bills or tax bills, bills that are not that do not pertain to constitutional amendments, and as well as election bills dealing specifically with redistricting. Those bills are not subject at all to crossover, but all other pieces of legislation will be considered by next Thursday if they are to remain eligible for further consideration in this legislative session. So basically, what we have now coming out of the Easter or spring break session that the legislature took is going pretty much into this crossover process. So for the next week, the remainder of this week and next week, there will be a lot of committee meetings, very full legislative calendars, multiple bills being heard, and from that, at the end of that process of next Thursday, we will know, we'll have a much cleaner, a much more concise sense of the bills that will be eligible for further consideration. So didn't really want to belabor the point. So, as Dr. Connolly mentioned, the spreadsheet is there for your review. Don't get too wedded to anything that you see listed, because things may change by at the end of next week.
Any questions about process or just questions for coordinator? Mr. Sutton.
Just one, and this might be more so for staff. Senate Bill 598, the Future Teachers of North Carolina program and our Future Teachers program. Any sort of overlap with that and anything that we're doing, being that we've got our, I guess we're somewhere around the second or third cohort of Future Teachers that might inform that bill or providing additional support for us in our effort?
What's your number? 587?
598.
I don't think we've looked at the overlap yet. Our in-house cohorts, I think, are only in their second year. So we would have a couple more years even before our own kids matriculate.
And Dr. Mel, this bill, I think, is more about courses that would be offered in high school for students that have interest in the teaching field, whereas ours is more about once you graduate and you know the program that we have where you could come back and teach for us. So this is more about courses that would be offered to those high school students who have an interest in the teaching field.
There might be a way to use it to jumpstart our students. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. What'd you say now?
You didn't hear that. Keep going. You didn't hear that. Ignore the peanut gallery. Ignore the peanut gallery.
I'm glad I don't sit on this side. Putting up with on this side of the table. Look at the gallery over there.
We see a lot.
Behind my back.
It's all good now.
Rabbit ears, a whole nine.
You can see right here.
I wish we could continue the levity, but I've got we just reloaded this, so if it wasn't there, it should be at the bottom within your assembly right now. Sharing a lot of data today, and sort of trying to give you the overall context. You may remember some of these numbers. This was something we were looking at a few weeks back when we were comparing current effect, July 1 effect, and then an HB 13 potential effect, and how it changed the class size caps and limits. And a major difference, as you may recall now, is that the class size is a hard cap now in the 7-1-17 set of numbers. It's interesting too, I think, if you look at the ratios, how we've been allotting and how close that has been to current legislation +3, give or take. So we've been maximizing, I think, our resources pretty well and still operating within, the legal limits as they've existed. But as you know, this has a heavy impact. So what we want to try and look at today in a short period of time, right? Issues of program, policy, people, space, costs, options, and my disclaimer, no solutions today, merely the enormity of the potential disruption within multiple options. So folks have been saying, what are you going to do? What's the impact? I'm going to just put a lot of numbers out there, and you'll see it's at least a three-dimensional Gordian knot, if you will. So looking first at programs, you've got the North Carolina Standard Course of Study, and we've done a lot of vetting of sort of what's required and what's suggested and what should be taught and what law is. And as I give you a couple examples in a few minutes, I want you to consider who would be best to be teaching these standards, because I'm going to show you what some of the existing standards are that sit on the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. A citation of the basic education program, which is still law of the land. And then interesting to note that, keep in mind that DPI does have individual certification for people, exclusively in art, exclusively in PE. So a curious notion, if you will. I'll just leave it at that. So an example from the North Carolina Standard Course of Study, and anyone can pull these up if you go to NCDPI's websites and standards. The code, as it reads, so this would be first grade. I pulled one from music. ML stands for music literacy. And this is what is to be taught. Interpret sound, symbol systems of music. And I want you to think about who's doing this teaching for a first grader. Interpreting rhythm patterns, quarter notes, rests, three-pitch songs, voice and instruments, iconic symbols to notate quarter notes and quarter rests. First grade, taught by whom? Let's look at visual arts. It's just a grab, third grade. Create art using a variety of tools, media, processes safely and appropriately, and this is called visual literacy, this set of standards. Understand how a single tool can be manipulated, variety of media with refined skills. Create art using the processes of drawing, painting, weaving, printing, stitchery, collage, mixed media, sculpture, ceramics, and current technology. Let's look at second grade, an example of standards to be taught in physical education. This is in the area of motor skills. And as you look at this, you can say, okay, well, you've got recess, you've got activity when you can go outside. But in terms of what a traditionally prepared elementary certified teacher, are they currently able to differentiate between non-locomotor movements with locomotor patterns and levels in variety of movement sequence. For example, I'm trying to highlight for you that this could be levels of expectation for teaching that exceed current preparation of elementary ed. But those who are certified, especially for these courses, obviously this is their bread and butter, they understand it, this is what they do teach. A couple of questions also off the DPI website. Do I have to offer health and PE to all students? Let me give you a second on that. Now, healthful living versus physical education, there is a differentiation. If you start looking at the standards for what should be taught in healthful living, it's a lot about, for young kids, clean habits, how do you handle food, how do you handle a cut or scrape, I mean, what you would contemplate to be healthful living, as opposed to physical education, which is much more rigor and activity and movement and things of that nature. And so you can see the second part here. There is a state board policy, but you can read here for a second how far it goes and how far and where it stops short. Moderate intensity level, duration sufficient to provide a significant health benefit. So you see it stops just short of thou shalt do X, but it does sort of give you the general framework of the importance of physical vigor and activity and things of that nature. So what I'm trying to show is a couple of things. You've got some state standards that show what should be taught. You also, what are the absolute mandates that must be met? 115C81, it's a lift from what was formerly referred to as the Basic Education Plan. It's still in place. We'll go ahead and take a second on this. The area of arts, physical education. So that's been sort of the legislation from which DPI then built its standards, its manuals, its guidance for all public schools. And as we view DPI, we see them as the agency who interprets or manages what legislation directs. And so obviously we take our guidance from DPI and always have. A scan at our policies, a couple that would be directing for us. Now again, this is Wake County Schools policy. So we raised the bar in Wake County. We were more directive in what should be done. And we also says it must be a certified PE teacher. So if depending on what occurs, we could end up then changing our policy to match practice or whatever. But this was one of those pieces that we needed to look at and say, okay, is there a potential conflict with decisions we might make? And then we do have a policy that addresses reduction in force. I'm just lifting a couple of pieces because it's lengthy, but I wanted to show you sort of the allowances within definitions.
Justifiable decrease.
Right. So these enable this decision making, not without a lot of work and a lot of individual review. But the stage is set if we need to go this way. Let's look at people. Board members have been saying for weeks, how many? Who we got certified? What can we do? So we were there are a lot of numbers coming here. Our current status for number of teachers in our schools, elementary teaching in the art, music, drama, PE, or dance, 356 people. All right. Of the 356, you can see how it breaks out. So 41 are elementary certified as well, 11 in other areas, but not elementary ed. 288 do not have additional areas of certification. That's sort of the big delta, 288. 16 are on term contracts, and as a side note, of the total 356, 55 are nationally board certified as well, which was a great question that one of the board members asked. So. Now, what about the demand? If the current law is unchanged, effective July 1, we would need 461 teachers. What were we at 356 a minute ago? So you already see a difference, but there's more on the way. HB 13, we'd only be required to produce an additional 32 teachers. So there's a heck of a difference between current law and what HB 13 proposed to resolve. So it might help you also understand, where did 13 million come from? Well, you know, somewhere between the total cost of the 461 and 32, and clearly it was an estimated guess of what the future might hold. So what's the supply available to us to address this demand or this need? Well, 90 are school-based instructional resource teachers, IRTs. Of them, 80 are elementary certified. So you see what we're starting to look at. Who could move sideways into the demand positions, regardless of how you created the vacancy, because I'm not there yet. 3 are certified in reading and 7 on terminating contracts. I found it really interesting that yesterday the board was emphatic about the importance of the IRTs and others in the schools to help with teaching the new curriculums as it rolls out.
Right.
And I'm sitting there yesterday listening to that, knowing that this slide was coming up today. We rely heavily on those positions, but are these solutions? Yeah. There are also 308 staff in central office who are certified in elementary ed, but those people could be in any positions right now. They could be upper administrative, they could be anything. So you're starting to see that if we needed to drag the net and pull people in who would meet certification, there are a number in different directions. Could you provisionally license 288 of those elementary special teachers that held no other? We could. So if we were looking to hold on to folks and provisionally license and then have them be cleared to teach the regular elementary classroom, provisional license could at least work for these individuals for 1 year.
If they wanted to.
Yeah, sure. I took a snapshot just of some other numbers at the end of March. We've got 487 elementary education teachers on terminating contracts. So if we needed to be looking for vacancies, now, you don't want to do that. I mean, they're probably elementary certified. That's what you're looking to hire, but and a few positions at the secondary level. And actually, we're holding those 5 right now, not knowing if we were going to need to move some people into those. In the applicant pool, when we look at our own database, there are enough numbers down there to also assist with this, but we've done nothing about looking at the quality of the applicant. Are they interested? Are they still in North Carolina? I mean, so there's been no cleaning of our applicant database to know exactly what our numbers are in that respect.
And that assumes that we get all of them
Yeah,
and people are, this is going to be an issue across the state.
I would think, yeah. Ours is going to be more severe, but yeah. Some implications. We could do white sheets around the room on implications, but I grabbed just a few. The elimination of elementary specialty teachers, that is a reduction in force if it's an elimination of those people, vacates positions in order to make room for regular elementary teachers. That's the cost neutral in terms of a dollar sign. I don't know that you'd call riffing people cost neutral on the humane side, but in that respect. Elementary special student offerings would be lost. if you use those vacancies to satisfy the 460 that you need. If you were moving people, IRTs, central office certified people, that loss of human capital would be very disruptive in our organization, because they're serving roles, they're delivering training, you know, they're key, they're in the network. So that would be extremely disruptive. You could end up with less than ideal educational impact with provisionally licensed folks and substandard applicants. As Mara said, we haven't looked at quality of our applicant pool. And year-round schools will need to reconfigure tracks as soon as possible, and this probably needs to happen no matter what we do right now, because we're about out of time for them. So some high-level implications, all right, but there are a ton of these, as I'm sure you were going through as you saw some of the numbers. I think it's important to remind folks of the history, and I guess that comes with having hung around so long. But your elementary art, and I want to read this because I think it's important. Music and PE historically were allotted by the state to school systems as a separate teacher category in addition to elementary certified classroom teachers. The multiple allocations were combined into a single block allocation in the mid-90s. School districts have continued to provide the elementary special teachers from the same block allocation in accordance with DPI manuals and general statutes. Block allocation enables flexible determination of the resources at the school level or district level, but it also allows for challenges to school-based decision-making. In other words, second guessing, why did you do that, you shouldn't have done that, et cetera, when in fact, that's been an allowance for the last 25 years in terms of how we were funding it. But I think it's a good example of sometimes either the unintended result of a block approach to something. While at the time it might have solved something for us, often it comes back and bites you later, and this is a good example of how it's happening right now. Let's talk about space, the final frontier. 66 elementary schools are short 286 spaces. And 45 have 214 spaces. Now, do we have a list by school? Yeah, I mean, you don't need all that right now. I'm trying to give you the macro effect. So, give or take 50-50 in terms of we've got room and we don't.
Except that we don't necessarily have room where we have the kids.
Right, you'll see that in a minute too.
I'm
Correct.
assuming it's coming up.
Correct. In the 66 and the 45, this includes if there are mobiles on the site and or mothballed mobiles on the site. So it's available spaces on site, which may be in use, or maybe storage, or maybe mothballed. The lower number, the third bullet, refers to off-site mobiles. If we were to move them to a school, it would take that long. I mean, the movement, the schedule, the permitting, the upfitting, all of that. I mean, it certainly couldn't happen in time to open school. A few cost looks. You've heard us repeatedly refer to $26 million for 460. I think that's about an average total cost of about $56,000 per teacher, which is salary and benefit, which is an average we're using in weight. If 13 were to go into effect, and needing only 32, then we need 1.8. And you can see somewhere about in the middle of that is 13 million, which is what I put in the budget. If the district were to pay for all the 288 elementary special teachers who aren't certified to get them provisional certificates, which is not terribly expensive, but if we were going to do that, we should at least pay for that. The total for all would be about 115,000. If there's a mobile to be moved and upfit and permitted and everything else, you're in the neighborhood of 86,000 for one teaching station if you need to relocate it and get it all clean. If you already have something on site, a vacant classroom, a mothballed mobile, it could be as much as 21,000 for certain kinds of furniture, instructional supplies, materials, things of that nature. So depending on the nature of the vacancy or the space and how you were solving it, those costs could vary. Remember I said we're not solving anything today, but I wanted to try and give you the really big impact picture of this. A number of options. Eliminate the specials and hire elementary certified from whatever source we go to find them, and you saw there were a number of places to go. Eliminate one or two of the elementary special categories if partial funding is provided. This is where Jonathan gets a little nervous because he's going, well, you gotta be careful here because you can't, you gotta be careful about what you're blanketing here, which is important. And we say one or two because depending on if there's any money made available or how we want to parse all this, it could be one or it could be two of the specials. An exciting bullet would be the board decides which special to eliminate, or you allow the school to decide. Local decision. You can see all of those are fraught with different effect. You can change the allocation formulas in all the, you could scavenge grades 4 through 12 to add positions down in K3. And some of those are already pretty large as they are. And Terry did run some analyses. If you changed ratios at the different levels by a certain amount, you got a long way to go before you get to 26 million solving that. I mean, that doesn't necessarily solve it, but it could be a partial contribution. You can increase the number of students in a classroom and then assign 2 certifieds in each space. So obviously very crowded, but you've met the requirements because you've got 2 teachers of record in one room. You can divide the 40 kids or whatever it is by that, and then you've met it. But obviously you can see what the classroom is going to look like. Dr. Martin will reassign students from schools without space to schools with space.
By August.
Obviously extreme.
July.
But that can be done faster than moving a mobile.
Yeah.
Not recommending, but if you're brainstorming solutions or any combination of those, and then obviously the last one, any combination and other possibilities. And I'm sure some of you have thought of other ways to get at this. What I've tried to give you is, what are we required to be doing? Are we bumping up against any policies locally or state? What is the human impact of current employees? What's the supply availability and where would we go to get them? And the quality of that supply? What are the space implications? What are the cost implications? And then what are some of the solutions? Obviously, we continue to seek Senate resolution. I know they continue to hear from folks all over the state. I honestly don't know where they are on their response to that. Since time is of the essence, we've got to meet with year-round principals and direct their actions to comply. That regrettably could be really messy because we could end up trying to make early decisions, which 2 weeks later you could easily say, oh, we didn't really have to do that. But you've already launched the year-round ships, you've told families what we're doing, et cetera, et cetera. And worst case, I could see almost 2 solutions. One is the year-round, who came up with something before legislation was modified, and the rest are the traditionals who are living with the modification. And yet, there are not a lot of districts in North Carolina that start their school, early July, as we do with so many kids and so many families. So we will wait as long as we can, but we're running out of time on year-round decision making. And then eventually bring it back in here based on what we see happening across town, try and look at some solutions that we can live with, and whatever we must comply with. So you had a lot there, and it was not put in your e-boards until a little bit ago because we were still editing. I was still adjusting this morning. So let me open it to you. Any questions about any of the data or observations at this point? I know we've got a lot scheduled this afternoon, but
I have a question on the class size maximum. So current legislation is 24 across the 4 grades. What would we do given the syncopation, I think it's page 2, with kindergarten and first grade? Do we retain a kindergartner on purpose? Do we advance a kindergartner to 2nd grade? How do we get by those
yeah, like
numbers,
dropping-
given the tightness
dropping
of
by
our
2,
schools?
you mean? Yeah, like
Yes.
from 18 to 16.
And I don't know why kindergarten is 21. But the biggest of the 4 grades is at that entry grade where they come in at
Yep.
such broad, just
I
wide.
I have no clue on the logic behind that. I can guess on a couple of things.
Well, you don't speculate on that, just numbers, what
Yeah.
have you all thought about doing, given the numbers being uneven?
Don't know.
Okay?
Don't know how we'd address it. And in Wake, with the mobility we have every day,
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely.
we will be requesting waivers every week.
That's right.
That you build your schedule during your first 2 months, but families keep moving in, so,
Particularly at elementary.
absolutely.
Ms. Mahaffey, did you have any questions?
Yeah, I guess it's more of a reflection. As I'm reading what we're talking about with, the possible, what happens if we eliminate specials. I'm thinking when I was overseas and in France, you don't have specialist teachers at the elementary level. You might have one teacher who gets them ready for their, year-end concert, or they do art in the class, and maybe someone comes once a week and they call it running, and they just literally run around the school. It's not PE as we know it. And to go from that school system to here, where you see this vibrant art on the wall, where the kids are taught the technique and they understand, you need someone who gets that in those positions. And, when you go into teaching, you go to teach your passion. And if you're not passionate about it, it's difficult. And, I taught French. If you put me in an elementary classroom, could I do it? Yeah. Would I be great at it? No. Up to a certain point, maybe. But the human side is lost in this bill, and the HB 13 it's a compromise. And we talk about smaller class sizes being necessary, but I have a first grader and a kindergartner, and they are reading well and doing well and thriving, and we came here because of Wake County Public Schools. And if it wasn't for this great school system, my family wouldn't be here. And I know there are a lot of other families who feel the same way.
Ms. Cash, then Mr. Fletcher.
This is a great presentation. It's so clear to me how this impacts the education of our kids to the negative. I agree, elementary education, when you go into the schools, the first thing you see is the art and the activity going on, and you hear that from parents a lot, and everybody knows how important specials are to the success of a child in education, especially in elementary. And I myself have a child that went into art based on an art program at Hunter that probably would have been pretty unsuccessful in school if she hadn't had the art to fall back on, and became very successful with it. And I don't understand how you can't say that you're reducing the class size by giving all these specials to the teacher. The elementary teacher looks at their specials as helping them tremendously on a daily basis. So for anybody outside of the school system to think we're helping an elementary teacher by changing the numbers needs to hear this presentation.
A couple of thoughts. One, a couple of things that may be missing from the presentation are the impact on PLTs and teacher planning and preparation. The current practice is that someone has to take care of the kids, hopefully instructing them in something worthwhile while the teachers have their planning period and the PLTs meet. All of that can't be done before the academic day begins, although sometimes PLTs happen before the academic day or after, depending upon bell schedules. And the other thing is that, and this is a common political mistake, is to assume that the state has a better understanding of the needs of the children in the building than does the principal. The governor easily did it when he said, we're going to reduce class size in third grade from 26 to 21, and it doesn't matter if the kids are reading or not. That's the only thing you can use that new teacher for. All right, so now we've got the Senate, led by Republicans, doing the same thing. And what it really does, it says that flexibility to best meet the needs of students in the building is taken away from the principal. If she needs a classroom of 10 to 1 to 10 for a certain group of students, she can do that with today's flexibility. But she can't do that with this. She can only do it the way the state prescribes it moving forward. And to take that flexibility away from the site-based administrator and to invest it on Jones Street is bad policy. Whether it's Democrat or Republican, it's bad policy.
Completely agree with Bill, and I was going to start by asking the same question about the planning periods, but would you also comment, there has been, and we've had some internal discussion about it, but a lot of comment about, but you didn't use the money provided to reduce class size before. Can you comment about the money provided to reduce class size compared to the total dollars to deal with growth and other things? Because I think it'd be important to get that sort of on record in this discussion.
Yeah, it's a little, I can't really speak for the state, because with our growth, it's a different set of variables.
Right.
However, I do think the macro numbers for the state are important, because I'm seeing a standard set of speaking points that don't refer to money. They just say we were reducing class size. Since 2011-12, the General Assembly increased funding in K-3 by $131 million. During the same period, the legislature cut K-12 teacher funding by $286.4 million. So the net effect was a reduction of $155 million statewide. Now, there was something going on during a few of those years, either called a negative reserve or whatever you wanted to call it, negative allotment, where you would get an allocation of funding on the one hand, but on the other, you also got a memo that said, but we need you to give money back. And folks aren't even remembering that right now. So the net effect has been a total reduction statewide. For us, with the growth we've been getting, with the impact, and if you took 10% of a net reduction of 155 million, which roughly we're in the ballpark, 15 million reduction over time for class size for us. So
Reduction.
yeah,
Not increase in funding.
if you
reduction in funding.
look at the macro numbers and you just apply the 10%, we did provide a pretty deep analysis, I think, over the weekend for you board members, and I don't know if you want to speak to it, Jim, because you might have internalized some of that a little better than I.
Well, again, just digging through our audit data and budget data, yeah, our total number of teachers has not increased through this period of time. And I just think it's important to get it on the record, whether it's our dollars cut, months of employment cut, there is no evidence of an increase in number of positions, which is a talking point that we hear circulated, and I just think it's very important to be on the record that that doesn't exist.
Well, as we've grown, as we've opened new schools, we continue to also provide for art, music, and PE at the elementary schools. So we've still been using that single allocation for multiple purposes, educational, but multiple purposes.
And purposes that are required.
Well, I think it's also important to recognize that the reason we've been able to maintain the ratios on the right to a degree and better is because the county has actually made up for months of employment when we've got the overall reduction. So the county has been picking up more of the teacher months of employment, and the state has been picking up less over the last 3 to 5 years.
I think there's one other curiosity about the way North Carolina funds schools, and that is that they typically don't send us a bucket of money. They allocate positions to us. We hire a teacher who then is paid based on the state salary schedule. So to say we sent $100 million to schools is not an accurate statement. They might have sent 100 positions to schools. They didn't send any money. The teachers got the money based on where they plug into the schedule. I think it's much simpler to talk about positions or months of employment, which is what we're given to use as opposed to full-time equivalents, and avoid the dollar issue, because the dollar issue is colored with, is this a 20-year veteran with National Board certification? It's colored with different issues other than what did you do with the months of employment that were allocated? And it's clear from the data the superintendent has presented and what our staff has prepared is that it was used for instruction. All of it.
And plenty of local as well, as Dr. Martin has pointed out.
On the options page, that's page 19 in the third bullet, where you say school board decides or allows school to decide, I guess that could look quite different from one school to the other. There's no set formula there. That would be the principal deciding that?
It could be, let's say that schools must reduce one of their specials. Then you might get to the point where the school would be deciding which one they would reduce. And it could vary greatly if you went down that road. It's a quagmire, but it's an option.
But that would be by the principal.
Well,
Or school.
could be. Or, the leadership team.
Right,
I mean,
principal, area
yeah,
superintendent.
Yeah. I mean, we still like trying to let those decisions be made as close to the classroom as
Right.
possible. So a lot of our principals would go, no thanks. Let the board decide that one.
The area soups want that job, right?
They're raising their hands right now.
They said the board told us.
But while yes, they can say that, but I do, back to Mr. Fletcher's earlier point, I mean, for me, it's about us also looking at in ways in which we want to model what we just said, which is the people who know best about what's happening in those buildings, or those folks who are in those buildings touching those kids. And so I appreciate Mr. Fletcher leading with that earlier, because I do think that's, for me as a board member, a place that we have to keep very conscientious in the front of our minds when we talk about this, especially when we're publicly talking about it, is we would be no different if we issued an edict in the General Assembly at this point to say, this is what you should do. Because again, that principal, the leadership gets to look at their school and say, here's what we absolutely know that we actually need the most in our school building. Again, not an ideal situation, I get it. I don't want to be a principal today making that kind of decision, but I also do think that those are the folks who are best suited to make those decisions, because again, Mr. Fletcher pointed out, it allows them at least some flexibility to look at scheduling, who's in their building, what those folks are, certified to teach, to give some flexibilities, because we can't forget about our teachers, not just planning, but, we actually do want them. And like today, when I was at school, seeing a teacher eat walking to her lunch duty, right? Like, those things are already happening. And so if we cut out specials, I'm not sure they're going to even be able to walk anywhere and eat at the same time. So when we know that teachers are already put in this position where they have very little time to do the necessities that we all get to do in our other jobs for those of us who aren't teachers, those things are even taken away, which to me are not even the best working conditions that we are already able to give our teachers. And so I want to flag that Mr. Fletcher pointed out, those folks in those buildings are best able to see the full impact of that, deciding what's cut, if that's where we are, should be cut. My 2 cents as a board member, not a teacher or a principal.
So I agree that we need to keep decisions as local as possible. A role I think that we have as a board and frankly, the central office, is to throw the equity lens on top of this as well. Because
We have a lot of work.
I'm not making any suggestions here, but what I'm saying is that if you look at the real impact on students, if you've got a school where you've got a really strong PTA who's already able to put in a bunch of extras and specials, and you have another school that doesn't have those kind of resources, then I think the specials are going to have a very differential impact. And this is not a decision we should be having to make, but if we have to make it, I think that's where we centrally have to
Well, essentially, I think
make
we
the
have to
big
give some
decisions
guidance.
where we throw the equity lens
Absolutely.
on top of this decision that we shouldn't be having
Well, I
to
think
make.
that's only one piece. I think there are gonna be several guidance points that we're gonna have to provide.
Right.
Right, I mean, I'm not saying, yes, go and principals make this happen. I do believe
Right.
they expect some guidance. That is our job as a board. So
But
we're not gonna.
my point is it's gonna have to be
skirt our
differential.
Responsibility.
I,
Yes.
I see a balance beam which solves this. On the one side, you've got people, and that'll be a solution. On the other side, you got money. And, or a combination, which brings you into the fulcrum a little bit. Some of the money will solve it, going through some of the people, whether it's, you know, turning in contracts, whatever. But those are your offsets. That's how I try and organize it and say, or both, solving both, so.
So,
But
I
it's
mean,
disruptive, there's no question about it.
at least. So I guess, I mean, there's several next steps that you listed here, but I guess, I want to go back to the fact that we are one of the few districts that need to be thinking immediately ahead, because we do have our schools that are ending and then starting for our multi-track schools. So I guess that's my question to you. You don't have to answer today, but definitely where the board.
I would
needs to
say
provide
that
some guidance.
administratively for year-rounds, we'll own that one, and we'll take off with it. Because at this point,
Right.
with nothing different, it's a compliance issue. And we'll have to talk through our principals how to meet the current requirement effective July 1. So there aren't a lot of options to get at, and we've not had that meeting yet. Those principals will have solutions, they'll have additional ideas, area soups, so, but on that, we'll have to go ahead and get moving, and I didn't necessarily see we couldn't move fast enough and get you up to speed to do that for year-rounds, I don't think. Obviously, you'll be informed and brought along, but again, we've dragged our heels almost as long as we can, and for that group of schools, and it's a lot of schools, so. Okay,
I see another hand up, yes.
thank you.
A sigh of okay. At least the energy level doesn't really change for this.
Calendar,
That
was a
We're
warm-up.
already there.
I just don't see a lot of light on there.
I don't either. I don't either. That's what I'm saying.
Arm or leg?
It's not a fun day.
Here. I don't need to be here this one.
Oh, no, yes, no. Actually, no, it's
Hi there. Round two. So, the next item on the agenda is the continued review that we've been providing around our non-traditional calendars, and wanted to set up today because we're headed towards a potential decision point on May 2nd with kind of where we've been and where we're going, and lay out all of the options again. So why are we doing this? I've been asked a few times, a couple of questions just about, we've spent quite a bit of time on this now, and it goes all the way back to, more than a couple of years ago, there have been multiple requests to take a look at our multi-track year-round schools, our single-track year-round schools, to determine whether or not we were using them efficiently, whether or not they're placed in the right locations, whether or not the feeder patterns work. And when I say operate efficiently, that's not just about tracks, but also with funding and what are the challenges, and are there recommendations or changes that could be made that would improve those things. So we actually began about a year ago with presenting you some initial information around utilization. And then we sort of, we hit the pause button just a bit, and then came back in the last few months with additional information and recommendations based on the data that we've presented you with. As always, we are driven by what's in Policy 4150. You'll recall that there are 4 pillars in there, but the 2 that we mostly look at are student achievement and operational efficiency. So when we're looking at the operation of our multi-track and single-track schools or our modified calendars, we're also looking at the student achievement pillar and the looking at the schools from the lens of what's happening academically in the school, what's happening with the student population in the school and the demographics that are there, and the role, if any, that our assignment practices or calendar practices have there as well. So just a reminder, 4150, we are here because there's been a lot of interest in taking a look at that. The recommendations that we're going to go over, and there's nothing really new in the recommendations for the calendars, but there were some questions at the last couple of meetings about how some things might be implemented within those recommendations. So we're going to flesh out a little bit more what implementation of some of these changes would look like.
Okay, so we started our conversation looking at our Track 4 schools, and there are 12 of them. 4 of them are ESM schools, and we set those aside because they're serving a different purpose. And we focused on the 8 that are listed on the screen here. And we made some observations. We said that of these 8 schools, more students request traditional than request non-traditional. There's a greater demand overall for traditional. I guess that's saying the same thing. You've got the history of students in high needs areas showing up for school late. And so you exacerbate that problem with the Track 4 calendar that starts at the end of July, and parents are thinking school doesn't start till the end of August. So that's very problematic for our Track 4 schools. And then as we look ahead and we start opening new schools, particularly in the Garner areas where I'm thinking now, with the opening of Bryan Road, the fact that we have multiple calendar schools, elementary schools in the area, makes that assignment to the new school a little difficult. And this would ease that transition for families. So we made these recommendations that 6 of the Track 4 schools convert to the traditional calendar for the 18-19 school year, and 2 of them convert to the multi-track, and those 2 become the multi-track choice for families in these 2 areas, Eastern Wake and in the Garner area. Net gain is a gain in elementary seats, okay? Then we moved on to talk about, oh, by the way, we slipped Carver in that group. I apologize. We did slip Carver in the group because Carver operates on a modified calendar, but it's the only non-magnet modified calendar. But the same observations, the same drivers apply to Carver. So Carver's in the recommendation and the feeder pattern problems. Yeah. Then we switched our conversations to the multi-track schools, and we showed you that at the middle school level we had an abundance of seats. 7 of our 9 multi-track middle schools are under-enrolled. We talked about the transition from elementary to middle school, that there's a 15% attrition rate. I don't remember the exact numbers of the elementary schools, but more than half of the elementary multi-track schools were also under-enrolled. As we open new schools every year, they're opening as traditional. And so that is having an impact on our multi-track schools. So, as we came to you with a recommendation, we really focused on supply and demand. Supply and demand. What supply do we have, and how can we get the demand into the supply to better use our multi-track schools. So we made a pretty tight recommendation here. We recommended that 2 elementaries and 1 middle school convert to traditional calendar for the 18-19 school year, that the Banks Road, which has over 400 seats that are not being utilized, Salem has a large number of seats not being utilized, Salem Elementary and Salem Middle. And then for the 1920 school year, looking ahead, because there were a lot of questions about the new Alston Ridge Middle School, scheduled to open as traditional calendar, on the same campus as Alston Ridge Elementary School, which is multi-track, okay? And so we would also recommend that Alston Ridge convert to traditional calendar in the year Alston Ridge Middle opens up, which is the same year that Parkside Elementary opens up. Notice I got the name right this time, Parkside. Okay, so those were our recommendations. Then there are pieces of it that also come into play, but what we're looking for on May the 2nd is really the calendar changes. We also think we will recommend an increase in base attendance area for East Cary Middle School and Adams Elementary. We'll do some feeder pattern adjustments to align the demand where we have seats, to better align the demands where we have seats. And then today we're going to talk to you about the revision in our application process. Basically, we have 2 application processes that kind of work against us. We want to utilize our year-round seats. Why? We get more school children into a building, okay? But at the same time, we're offering parents an option to go to a traditional calendar. So we want to offer an opportunity to rethink that. We want to keep our multi-track year-round schools full and healthy, but we also know that there's a need for some families to have a traditional calendar. Not all families, but some. So you've got to find that balance between the back and forth between the 2 calendars. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We've had it on the website for feedback.
Just one additional thought sort of as we're going through this is that, and there are several board members that have talked about how we continue to provide parental choice, but make sure that it has a purpose and a context that serves the overall priorities of the district as well. I think it's choice with a purpose is what one of our board members likes to say. So what we're looking at here is really a multi-pronged approach. It's not just about changing calendars. It's also about reviewing feeder patterns. It's also looking about what the options are. And it is now looking at how we look at the structures that families use to exercise choice and how we can improve those as well.
And I didn't mean to skip over slide 5. There are 4 other remaining modified calendar schools, but they are all also our magnet schools. So at this point, we're not making any recommendations on those calendars. No changes recommended for those 4 schools: Partnership, Centennial, Moore Square, and Southeast Raleigh. Okay. All right, we've had the information on the website for a couple of weeks now. We actually, school messenger, 4,500 calls were made to notify families. Heads up, we're talking about your school. Love to hear your feedback. The principals sent letters to their staffs at these 4 schools, and we've got feedback. As of the 17th, yesterday, 141 parent responses for Salem Elementary, Salem Middle, and Banks Road. And then just 3 responses from Alston Ridge. As of yesterday, 43 staff responses. And as you can imagine, and I'm sure you looked at it, you get it both ways. I love the multi-track calendar for this reason, this reason, this reason. Please change this to traditional for this reason, this reason. It was both ways, okay? But some things that really stood out, and we wrote an FAQ just to provide. There weren't a lot of questions, but I took the comments and made them into questions so that I can give some answers. Kind of like what a teacher would do. So one of the big concerns was, whoa, if you change these schools to traditional calendar, every one of them has continued growth. Aren't they going to get overcrowded quickly? Well, for Alston Ridge, yes. There's pretty astronomical growth in Alston Ridge. But with the opening of Parkside, we'll be okay. For Banks Road, there's good growth going on with Banks Road. But with the opening of 2 more elementary schools in the area, E35 and E45, and the fact that they have over 400 unutilized seats at this time, we'll be okay.
And you
Okay?
have other multi-track year-round schools in close proximity that have
Yes.
available seats as
Yes.
well.
For Salem Elementary, there's a little bit of growth, but when you look out to 2020 and 2024, it's not astronomical. Salem Elementary will be fine. And then Salem Middle School, there is a little bit of growth there too, but not considerable. Actually, over the next 4 years, we're projecting a negative growth. And then the 4 years after that is a little bit of positive growth. So,
This is based on their current base assignment areas?
yes, based on their current
Just
base
base
assignment
only?
areas.
No
Yes.
calendar option or
Right.
magnet student in? Okay.
Right,
All right.
right. None of these schools have a large number of calendar option students into their schools. All of them have a significant number of students out who are wanting traditional calendar. Another reason that they've bubbled to the top of the list. Another concern is that there are families out there who genuinely like the year-round calendar. Okay, they like those breaks at non-traditional times. There are families, and I think this is true, that their children do better. I don't know the reasoning, but they feel like they do. But I want it to be clear that we're not taking away the choice of a multi-track assignment. It's just that these schools won't be the choice. You'll have another choice if you really want to keep your children on the multi-track calendar. And then,
Laura, related to that, we've gotten a bunch of emails, particularly about Salem Middle. It says there are no other year-round middle schools near Salem. Can we address that?
Yes,
Because in fact, I would argue otherwise probably.
yes, I would say, first off, middle schools, the distance to a middle school is very different than the distance to an elementary school. You know, we have a lot of elementary schools all over the place, but the middle school distances are greater. So the choices would be Lufkin or East Cary. And we haven't settled on which way it would go. Most likely we'll divide the attendance area, so some go to East Cary, some would go to Lufkin if they choose calendar. Okay, so, but to me, those are not so far away, because you know, remember in the East, we're talking about, back when I was a classroom teacher, and I live in the East, by the way, Wendell moved from the 27th safest city in the area to the 12th. Go Wendell. I don't know if you saw that report yesterday. Morrisville is the #1 place to live, but I like Wendell. Our calendar option has always been Durant and Durant. But the distance never was an issue for families who wanted year-round. Okay, so I think it's going to be okay. There was a third concern, and I'm having a hard time. Oh, the third concern was that some people think their base assignment's going to change. We're not going, for these 4 schools, we're not making any recommendations to change their base assignment because of these recommendations to change their calendar. Okay, so those were the top 3 things that I saw in the feedback that I felt like I had to respond to that. Slide 7 just gives you the, you know, some of the stuff that we heard. Okay, I think that's it for me, right? Sorry. All right, so now what we want to talk about, this is big. We want to introduce and we want to review our current practices for calendar options and talk about some thoughts we have for new process. And we've got the big wigs all at the table here. Glenn is he's the man when you're talking about the application processes. And then Tamani and Beth, of course, they're the magnet gurus. So in part of our recommendation is we're going to blend all this together. And so I'm going to shut up.
And I just, as a point of historical reference, because I'm old as dirt and been here that long, when we first started our year-round program in the district, it came out of the magnet office with an application process that came out of the magnet office. And so these folks are here because they understand better than anyone else, along with Glenn, how an application process can work to help us. And so we've relied on their expertise and contribution as we work through what we're getting ready to present.
Can I just say, before we go on to the calendar application, I think it's important to underscore that we only get the benefit of seats if 4-track year-round schools are fully enrolled. And we talked about that in an earlier work session, but I think when we're talking about many parents are worried about schools becoming overcrowded, I think we need to underscore that for a year-round, to get those added seats, they need to be almost over subscribed, to have the tracks work out. All the tracks need to be fully loaded, so that when we have under-enrolled year-round schools, we're not getting that capacity, we're losing capacity in some ways. So I think that's an important thing to underscore. But I am going to ask you a question about Austin Ridge when we get to the end of this, because I'm a little nervous about that recommendation. I'll just put that out.
Okay. So as you know, every base school has a calendar option at the elementary and middle school level. If your base school is traditional, you can apply to any one of the non-traditional calendar schools, as opposed to if your base school is non-traditional calendar, you can apply to the traditional calendar. Each year, the calendar option application period opens after the magnet selection results are posted to families. This happens generally about February or March. And when we make these selections, we use a prioritized selection criteria to select families to fill any available seats. The prioritized selection criteria we use are entering grade siblings, trying to get to the same school that their older siblings are already attending, K-8 sibling calendar matching, rising grade 6 students who want to go to the same calendar school that they attended in elementary school. And then we look at the crowding of the sending school, starting with our most crowded schools, and prioritize those down to fill any available seats. Available seats are determined by, we look at the school, the number of students that are attending that school for next year, and then we fill, using these prioritized applicants, to fill any available seats that we may have for the next school year. Because all of these applications are done in February or March for the next school year. Transportation, currently the way we have it set up is neighborhood busing for all students who go to their calendar option school, with the exception of students who live in the no transport zone, which is the walk zone area that's designated by the transportation department. So what would we like to change for next year, or for 18-19, I'm sorry, is to no longer run the calendar application process, but to separate it into 2 separate applications. Specifically, the multi-track year-round applications, and we'll talk about how we're going to try to marry that with the magnet applications, and then taking the request for traditional calendar and making that separate with the early transfer applications. And the reason for this is because they're counterproductive. Like Laura had said, we're trying to fill our multi-track year-round schools, but we're also trying to understand that not all families can operate on the multi-track year-round calendar. They need the summer breaks, they can't handle the track outs. So on slide 11, we've got the proposed changes for the multi-track year-round calendar. These would be students who are currently assigned to a traditional calendar school who are applying to go to a multi-track year-round school. We'd like to marry this into the magnet application period, just as it used to be in the past. This would be one of the schools that students can select in the list of schools that are in the application. Families can select this school. It would be the designated school for their address, just as we've done currently. Everyone has that 1 or 2, depending if it's elementary or middle school, calendar option schools assigned. We think this would be good to help the magnet, to help the multi-track year-round schools, because they're able to utilize the magnet marketing and recruitment to help them gain the applicants that they need to fill all of these seats to the capacity that you spoke of.
Our marketing guru.
Right. Even to the extent of including year-round as part of what we do with the fairs when we're marketing magnet schools as well, to bring greater visibility and opportunity for that there as well, which is something that we used to do.
I think it's important to highlight here, we've had a lot of parents at least email us saying, why don't you market year-round schools anymore? Well,
This would be the solution.
yeah.
Let me ask, that you're using the terminology school as opposed to program. And I think our magnet selection criteria is based on applying to a program, not to a particular location for the program. Is it the same thinking for year-round?
I think the distinguishing factor for multi-track would be the calendar. We're not in a position where we've looked at programming. The programming is the
No, I'm
that's the
saying,
distinction.
but that would be the program.
Correct,
Year-round
yes.
would be the
Yes.
program.
Right.
Yes.
So wherever your house is, based on the boundary of the particular school,
Right.
you'd be applying to year-round, and it winds up being, because you're addressed, you're at school X.
Correct.
Okay, all
It'd be
right.
the designated school just as it is now for your address.
Well, I'm trying to say, no, it wouldn't be, but that, okay, all right. It's a different language around it. You're applying to a program, not to a school.
Right.
So it is a different concept in order to
So it's like,
communicate.
where is the year-round, what is the year-round program that you have access to
Right.
based on your address?
Right, that's the new question.
Like we have
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, I get that.
So the selection criteria that we propose to use,
Right.
again, keeping some of the similar ones that we're currently using, but adding in some additional ones, because it's going to be included with the magnet application, we felt like it would be good to incorporate some of those as well. So just going through them, so entering grade siblings, again, keeping that one. Keeping the K-8 sibling calendar match. One of them that we took from the magnet applications that we use for the Group 2A magnets is trying to bring more diversity to the multi-track year-round schools by offering higher priority for students who come from a low socioeconomic area. Again, keeping the rising grade 6 students who want to stay on that same calendar from elementary. Again, using crowding, again, starting with the highest crowded schools and going down. And then also incorporating the 10% lottery that we use with magnet seats, that if you don't fit any of these selection criteria, you don't get any priority points, you still have a chance to get seated through a true lottery process. And transportation, so we'll need a discussion to have, what do you want to do with transportation? Would you like to keep it as is? Would you like us to focus on trying to create a target transportation area? There's a lot of different ways that we can go with this, but again, we'll leave that to a discussion to get some insight from you as the board. So now switching gears to now going to the request for traditional calendar. Notice how I'm using two different words here. I've got multi-track year-round applications, because we're trying to get people to apply. And now we're talking about requests for traditional calendar, where people are asking to leave the multi-track year-round calendar and go to the traditional calendar. So we would try to incorporate this into the early transfer period, which is during the same time period as it happens now in February, March. This would be after the magnet and multi-track year-round applications. Parents would already have their results from that application period before they would apply here. Again, it would be for the designated school for their address, and the selection criteria would be similar, but not quite entirely the same. We would use entering grade siblings again, K-8 sibling calendar match again, as well as rising grade 6 students trying to stay on the same calendar from elementary. But now incorporating something that we use during the final hardship period, which is the reason for request provided by parent. During the final transfer period, they're allowed to give us there's a text box provided for families where they can give us a narrative as to what their particular hardship is. We're looking to incorporate this into the early transfer period for these families who are looking to go from a multi-track year-round school to a traditional calendar school, so we can find out what's their story, what's their particular reason for needing this request. And then moving to transportation, again, just as I had said with the multi-track, we'd like to get some insight from the board as to how they want to proceed with the level of transportation that's provided to these families.
I appreciate having the space for the parents to share more information. Having gone through this myself, it can sometimes seem inhuman, and so to be able to share, and I know that someone will read it and take that into consideration, I think will be greatly appreciated by families. Thank you.
So just to recap, we're trying to increase the efficiency or utilizations at our multi-track year-round schools, as well as understanding and hearing parents who are trying to request out of the multi-track calendar school to go to a traditional calendar school. So these would be our proposals. We look forward to getting your feedback, and then I'm going to pass it back over to Laura, and she's going to talk about how the existing students would be impacted. Question?
Can I just ask one question about the application process? I mean, this is moving, I think, in very much the right direction. It's something we've talked about for a while, so I commend that. My question is, if I'm a parent who might want to apply to magnet schools and calendar schools, right now with the magnet schools, I sort of prioritize this school or program, this school or program, this school or program. How would the calendar fit into that mix if I would potentially want to consider both?
Perfect. So back on slide 11, one of the bullets talks about using the current prioritization. So right now what we have is for early college and magnet, if you apply to an early college and a magnet and you get seated at your early college school, we don't process your magnet application because we prioritize the early college as being the top of the two schools that you really want to go to.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't get seated at your early college, your first choice, you would get put in an applicant pool, and then you could be considered for your magnet application. We would do the same for the multi-track, using early college first, magnet second, and multi-track third. So if you applied for both and got your magnet, we wouldn't process your multi-track application. So parents would be able to choose then what they're trying to accomplish. Am I trying to apply for a magnet, or am I trying to change my calendar?
And you could choose to only list your
Yeah.
calendar option.
Yes.
Right.
The calendar, the multi-track year-round, if that's what you want.
Yeah, if you only listed, that's
Then that would
easy.
be the
The
only
question
one
is
you
if you
could-
listed
Right.
both, and what I'm hearing is we're going to specify as opposed to, I don't get a say, calendar first,
Right,
magnet
no,
second.
I don't think we do.
Yeah, no,
It'd be too
we just need to be
difficult.
clear,
And our marketing will be clear.
yes.
What would be the current enrollment at Salem and capacity or utilization factor at Salem Middle were it converted to traditional today?
Okay. If Salem Middle converts to traditional today, they would be at, and what we're doing is we're adding everybody at the school, okay? Base and non-base, okay? They would be at 72% utilization.
Don't believe that.
Middle school.
You don't believe that?
No.
Well,
There are more than 1,100 students there today.
oh yeah, you're right, that's an error.
Okay, so what is the new capacity
Okay, so
of the building, not on the
903,
year-round
new
calendar?
capacity is 903.
903.
And they have 967 base and 142 non-base is there.
Okay, so there are 1,100 and how many students there?
Say again,
So how many students are attending the school today?
967 plus 142,
Okay. Just over 1,100.
yeah,
Plus 142.
Okay, so,
Okay, how many?
Yeah.
9.
And you're,
so now we've gone from an under-enrolled school to one that is
120.
15% over
yeah,
capacity.
110.
Well, 200 over 900
It's
is,
closer to 120, I believe.
yeah, gonna be 118% or something like that. I'm having problems with that.
Okay. Well-
So, just, I'll leave it at that point right now, but I
It would
think
take,
that's
it would take a while for that to work through,
Yes.
which, because you'd have the, next year's sixth grade class would not include families that were calendaring in for year-round. So it would take 3 years to work through, but they would go to.
well, it would
year-round.
include the folks who had calendared out.
Right, but what you
Okay, so
don't-
anyone who had calendared out of Salem would be in Salem Middle, Salem Elementary, would be base assigned to Salem Middle the following year.
And all eligible to grandfather, which I expect the grandfathering will be high. All of the change will happen slow over time. And what you don't have a sense of is who's going to calendar out once it becomes traditional. given what's on the website as how many want to remain in year-round, then there's gonna be a chunk of families who will calendar out of Salem Middle to go to Lufkin or East Cary. Okay? So all of that put together, over time, should balance out.
The following year, Apex Friendship Middle School.
And Apex Friendship Middle School, so, yeah.
For now.
Mr. Sutton?
So I like the idea. I'm thinking about from a marketing standpoint for the year round. So putting my parent hat on as a parent, when you shift the year rounds to now with the magnet, my mind shift goes now to sort of the program. So I guess my question is, what becomes the program benefit to me as a parent to apply for a year round? Or are we thinking that the calendar itself becomes
In the
the
past,
draw?
right, in the past, when year-round was with Magnet, the calendar was the thing. It was the thing you went for because you wanted that calendar. There really wasn't an academic program the same way you find in a magnet school. The thing that you went for was that year-round calendar, was that multi-track calendar. That was really all.
Anticipating that was going to be your answer. Does it make sense, or should we add something to sweeten the pot in terms of program benefits to the year round? Because there are some.
I'm gonna defer that question. Somebody's got some money.
Because I'm thinking, like, I mean, we don't know enough about the continuous learning calendar yet, but continuous learning might be one.
I think we have
language
to,
immersion.
I think we have to look at what the response is, what the impact is of the changes that we make in the marketing that happens, and that's an ongoing review. For some families, what happens in intercession and if there are options available at the school might be important, but not necessarily for all schools or all families. So I think we'd have to look at what the impact is of the changes that we make, and then maybe even differentiate within the school what other programming, for lack of a better word, we might want to consider that could be available. But to begin with, the option, the theme that they are looking for is the calendar.
The other benefit, just part of the calendar, was an expectation is a significantly less likelihood you're going to be in an assignment.
That's
of
correct.
a new school opening up down the road.
Right, right.
That historically.
That's always a big sell for
Yeah,
Magnet
the
and for
stability.
year-round has always been the stability.
Fact was that you had a protected status, if you will, since you're in that multi-track program.
We've at times looked at putting programming in year-round. It tends to be costly because what you don't want to do is have one thing on one track and make that track so identifiable. In either way, if you just put immersion on one track, then does everybody just want that track? You know, and so looking at how you put a program in and how you balance it across the school, it's a bigger conversation about how you do that. Ms. Cash?
So, I hate to say this when you said old as dirt, but I think I was 12 when I was on the board.
So sorry.
Back when we had the application, when we started year-round, I do know that it was a heavily marketed program, of course, because it was brand new, but they did give you the option to choose it in order. Like if you wanted the calendar more than you wanted a magnet, you could put it in that order. The school, we also were very keen on what was the health of the whole system. So what schools would need these students more. So I think it's such a good way out of control. So even if they would maybe put the year-round as the first choice and a magnet as a second, if the magnet was where was best for us to have them placed, we would put them there.
There was clarity, you're saying?
There is very clear options for the parent could really clearly choose and put them in order of choice, but we still, or not me, but they had the control over where to put them that the system needed them most.
We work we worked really closely, we have for the last 3 years, with some economists at NC State. And I would really prefer to defer to them in this discussion, because we don't want to do anything to hurt Magnet, because that's another goal
Oh,
of
no,
the district.
absolutely not.
And how would what you're describing, how would that play out? And they can do the analysis for us and let us know.
We'll be happy to look at it and see.
Yeah, we're happy to
Well,
look
I mean,
at
that's
that.
exactly right, that we don't want to hurt any school.
Right.
Sending, receiving,
Right.
magnet, year-round, it's all very underdone under the kind of microscope.
That's what happens.
Um, my,
That's good.
my question, is concerning Alston Ridge, and our very first board meeting, we heard, back in December, that Hortons Creek would not become overcrowded because Alston Ridge would be the calendar option. And that was how we would stop Hortons Creek from being overcrowded, which we know it, because we can't do mobile units, we can't add to their capacity. By converting Alston Ridge to traditional, you know, we're taking away that calendar.
They'll still have a calendar option. I don't know what it would be. It could be Turner Creek, it could be the next one over, would be Carpenter. I'm thinking geographically where, they would still have a calendar option, okay? So we'll be able to manage the utilization.
Okay.
Yeah.
Both of those are further.
And it's
Because you've
hard-
said that as well.
It's hard to imagine that right now, given.
Farther away.
Farther away.
Yeah, they are definitely farther away. And historically, though, your year-round calendar option hasn't been a closed school. That's historically been true there.
Well, historical and a part of the county that's growing very quickly is not a long history always, so. Yeah.
So historically, we did this before. Do we know what, or assume we know what the demographic makeup of the year-rounds were when they were part of the magnet? And being that we know that, so again, when I think about putting those together, the purpose of magnets is to, of course, maintain or not racial isolation. So then, do year-rounds then become a tool for diversity as well? Or do we, or does the unintended consequence of creating schools that then become somewhat racially isolated because you have groups or families that tend to favor year-round calendars?
So we have some magnet schools that we've tried to bring in the lower socioeconomic students into those schools, almost like that reverse magnet. And so,
So that's what this is saying, we've introduced that
Yes.
priority into the year-round, where we're looking, we give a high priority to lower socioeconomic students who want to participate in multi-track year-round.
So that's a group that we would more
Market.
heavily market to?
make it a higher priority.
Right.
And they have a base now, they didn't have a base.
Those are the
That's
two
true.
things that I was gonna say, that all of our year-rounds do have a base now, which helps with maintaining more diverse schools, but also within the application process for multi-track year-rounds, by giving a priority to students who are higher needs, and giving them a higher priority to get into a multi-track year-round school helps with maintaining diverse schools through parental choice as well.
Which is something honestly we didn't do before.
So then back to my original point, you gotta have some programming then that kind of helps support.
That's why I said it would probably need to be differentiated and targeted based on what the needs were of the families that were attending schools.
Okay. Just thinking about and sort of maintaining a
Yep.
healthy schools and healthy balance in all of our schools and the unintended.
So, another big question coming from the feedback is how does it affect the existing calendar option students? And it would be no impact at all. Okay, these are future students who apply for multi-track or request for traditional, unless unless we decide to make some changes in transportation, and then there would be most likely an impact there. And if that were to happen, of course, all grades are eligible to grandfather. Okay?
So just,
So I am a fan of the application process. And I would love to see us promote the multi-track program robustly. I hate the idea of giving up seats and causing families who are currently participating faithfully and fully in the multi-track program to lose that seat or feeder pattern. The concern I have is that a robust promotion program that says, sign up, apply, we want you in the multi-track program, and then having a sunset date of 1 year from now out there doesn't go together. Nobody's going to apply to go to a year-round school for 1 year and then have to change back. So I would like to see us take the Salem conversions off the table for indeterminate time in order to use this promotion strategy to relieve the pressure in the other schools and voluntarily get more people into the multi-track program, elementary and middle. That's the that is of the things that we have here to decide today, and what we're going to look at on the May meeting, which is where you were. The first May meeting is where you were lining up to. That's where I'd like to be. If we're going to promote the application, and we've got a school that, if it converts to traditional, the middle school is going to be 20% over capacity the day it converts. I'm concerned about all those numbers, but I would like for us to give the promotion program an opportunity to work. And if we tell people, we're going to apply, it's going to be great, but a year from now we could cut you off. That's not a good marketing strategy. And so I really think the two are tied together. If we're going to promote it and have an application process and promote participation in year-round, then the Salem schools need to come off the table.
Right, I was just gonna say, it makes sense that these 4 schools that we're talking about changing to traditional, they would not be in the promotion list, okay? Knowing that we would be changing their calendar in 18-19, okay? But, I mean, the recommendations, you can go any way. We've got the track 4 recommendations on the table, 6 of them going to traditional, 2 of them going to multi-track. We've got the 4 multi-tracks on the table, and we've got the request process on the table. So any one of those, you can pick and choose. It's not a package deal here, okay?
The other one I'm concerned about is the Alston Ridge combo decision. I'm very concerned about that too, just based on the surface.
I have to agree with Mr. Fletcher. I'm hesitant to take multi-track off because we don't really know yet where we're going with the Senate, and I hate to take seats out of capacity right now. I would prefer to leave multi-tracks in as well, because we have 2 things we're going to try. We're going to try some recruitment for the multi-track, and we're also going to set some parameters around multi-tracks going to traditional. So we've got some avenues that we might be able to fill the multi-tracks better. So I'm hesitant to take any seats out of our youth right now.
I will say that, the issue of, if we change a calendar anywhere, it's always going to be, we're always going to bring it to you a little bit over a year out so that it can be a part of the enrollment plan process for the next year. So there'll always be families who either need to know that that's not what they're asking for if there's an application process, or that it will change after they apply possibly. So that there's always going to be that that disconnect. And in this particular case, if the Salem stayed on, whether it's this year or next year or 2 years down the road, there would be a year or so process in which, there'd be a full year in which families had asked for something that might be changing on them. If they went for what it was in the year that they started, that then changes the next year. I know I messed up how I said that, but.
I think I know what you meant.
Okay, all right.
But to say, you're not gonna, to say the program we're asking to apply to will end the end of the next academic year is
Right.
not an effective recruitment
Right,
strategy.
which is why, as Laura said, we would not, they would know now, and we would not market.
Well, I would
as a
rather they
year-round
know
school.
that they're gonna remain multi-track.
Right, and that's what you're asking. So, again, all of these recommendations are kind of a la carte, right? In the sense that we can take a look at some of them
It's
and
not a
and
bell
certainly make
schedule,
decisions.
is
I
what
know.
Yeah.
But the questions, and I've had these questions and discussions with several of you about whether or not we should apply the strategies that we're looking at, because it's a multi-pronged approach to addressing what's happening with our multi-track year-rounds that are under-enrolled, and a calendar conversion to traditional was only a part of it and only for 3. So you know, as Ms. Cash said, looking at both the application processes and how that might help, and changing the marketing and how that might help prior to making a decision about changing the multi-track year-rounds. I understand where she's coming from on that, and that's a discussion that I would love for you guys to have and decide on what you want to do. The single tracks, again, we've given you the information on what our priorities are that are driving that. And I think generally speaking, I've heard positive feedback around moving to the application process, which can happen and which we would want to exercise beginning with the 18-19 school year, whether or not we change any calendars.
I'm gonna let Ms. Hartenstein ask a question, because I dare not ask if we try these options and do nothing with any of these calendars at 4:10 when we need to get to the budget. But I'll put it on the table since we don't decide till May 2nd.
In the parental comments and several emails, they talk about these developments around Salem. Do we have any ability to project what we can expect from those developments?
Yes, we talked about that earlier, yes. It's not significant growth in the Salems.
It's not.
And at Salem Middle, it actually ends up for the next 4 years, it's a negative growth, and then the 4 years after that, it's a little bit of growth, not significant, okay?
So for all practical purposes.
Apex Middle,
Say again?
Apex Friendship Middle opening.
Yeah, and we also have Apex Friendship Middle opening.
Those numbers you're talking about do or do not include that.
This is the base of Salem Middle.
Yeah.
Okay, so by 2020, they'll have negative 14, okay?
Is that
And
because of
then-
Apex Friendship, or is that because of
No,
something else?
it's just that, just
Okay.
their base. And then by 2024, they'll see a growth of about 70 middle school
So
students.
their base is so
80.
small geographically.
Right.
I mean, it is a postage stamp on the Western Hemisphere compared to every other school over there. So to only compare base to base, I think, is an incomplete comparison. So,
The second comment would be that if we're going to have a campaign for year-round, it needs not to be just for Western Wake, it needs to be for the district.
Oh, yeah.
For all of our,
absolutely.
Yeah.
well, we keep talking about Western and
The Salem are the two schools
that are on the table, but we have other
That are
under-enrolled that need some
showed up
support.
earlier last
Right.
Right, absolutely.
So can I just recap what I think I'm hearing, you know? Are we ready to move forward with our track 4 recommendations? Is there hesitancy with that?
Those are not about capacity.
Right.
Those have other factors that
With the track 4, it was quiet on the bottom of one slide. I think it's really important to emphasize that what we're talking about here in terms of the application choice, if track 4 is there, it's not part of the application choice. I just think it's important to emphasize that.
Right, and in particular, if we make these changes, the 4 remaining ESM schools that are track 4 schools are not choices for parents to go into. Okay, we actually, you know, you gave us that direction a while ago. Okay. Then it sounds like.
And that's the page 3, at the bottom of page 3.
Yes.
Is that what we're talking about? It's the first thing you're trying to get clarity on, right?
Yes.
The 1 through 8.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Okay. Then, it sounds like, I'm just gonna skip over multi-track a second. It sounds like, you seem, positive toward the changes in the application process, application for multi-track and request for traditional. We put on the table to talk about transportation. I'm sensing we might leave it as it is for now and maybe revisit it in the future. Sometimes if you make too many changes, you can't tell what's impacting what, you know.
Yeah, we don't have a recommendation on transportation
Yeah.
at this time. We would need to develop that and bring that in a different arena.
And there's such a larger.
Right.
I think the transportation decision is really critical, though, before we have any kind of a choice.
Oh,
Because,
absolutely. You got-
because there's a huge difference if I've got neighborhood provided transportation, if it's express bus, or if I have to provide it on my own.
Right.
And I think as a board, we can't have, it's damn tough to provide 2 buses going through every neighborhood. So I'm not sure that we can continue with the guaranteed neighborhood. So I do think the transportation needs to be on the table reasonably parallel with this decision about the marketing process. I mean, I understand the challenge with it, but I think if we don't have that decision, then parents, how does a parent decide?
Well, if you make changes in transportation, that affects existing students and new applicants.
Correct.
So, gotta think about that. It would be my preference that we're doing the magnet transportation study right now. And, that's taking more time than we thought it was, because it's not as simple as you think it is, everything's very complicated. So our goal was to get it for 18-19, but I'm not sure we're gonna make that goal. So it could be that for 18-19, for the calendars, that we leave the transportation as is, and then shoot for 19-20 for the targeted areas like we may end up with magnet. We think it's actually gonna overlap.
It's got a larger transportation discussion.
Yeah, that's what I
pretty
just said.
big.
It's such a
But-
large
but
conversation. There's.
Once you make those changes, though, everybody's gonna be affected. Well,
Which is why it's,
Yeah.
I
Why
was
we
just
need
saying,
to
my
know.
concern is to not do a piecemeal transportation, because everything is gonna impact.
Right.
multiple.
Yeah.
So what we're saying at this point is, we would not make any changes to transportation, but we would have, for 18-19, we'd have to bring that as part of a bigger package that includes the review we're doing with Magnet, the review that we might need to do on recommendations for any changes here, or other things that we may have to bring. It's just a bigger transportation discussion, not tied just to this.
but I understand the need to have that discussion.
Mhm.
Okay, then the third big topic is the 3 schools for 18-19 and 1 for 19-20, that hearing good thoughts about, let's not make those changes, let's see what the changes in the application process and the marketing, how that helps our utilization in multi-track schools before we come. Let's keep things the way they are if we can and improve them through these other factors, these other ways, the utilization. And I heard that from 2. What about everybody else?
But this is Banks and Salem? the
Yeah,
elementary.
Banks, the Salems,
And what about the Austin?
and Alston Ridge.
Okay, and what about the changes in the attendance areas? I'm just looking at all of
Yeah.
page 4.
I mean, I'm just trying to be clear.
Yeah. Is all of page 4, you're saying maybe?
No, I'm not saying all of page 4.
Just the calendar piece.
Just the calendar.
Just the schools changing calendars. The rest of that stuff we're gonna include in the enrollment plan anyway.
Okay, got it. Just
Yeah.
wanna make sure.
Yeah.
Mr. Taylor, I see your hand now.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to be clear, because what I'm hearing is we'll just kind of make a marketing shift and then sort of increase our marketing.
And the
Well,
application
improve our
process
marketing.
also.
And the application
And
process.
then that. Because my thought is like, for parents, like facility utilization helps us, not, I mean, parents don't really care whether the school is under the road or over the road. That helps us. That doesn't really benefit parents. And so, and I defer to the marketing guru, and I think Mr. Fletcher, you got some marketing experience. I know this is enough to be dangerous. But if our brand, Wake County Public School System, we take our brand and say that's like Coke. And so if we're just kind of beefing up the marketing, it's like new look, same great taste. Or when you change your marketing, you change the product. So it's not like we're offering the same product, right? So you got a new Coke.
Real sugar.
So
Cherry Coke.
I hear we just kind of, are we just changing the marketing, but we got the same product, same taste? Or why not,
Not yet.
when you change your brand or change your marketing, then also kind of change the taste too? So I see a little bit of a miss.
We've never marketed it, have we?
I'm sorry?
It's
Have
been
we
a
ever
long
really
time.
marketed?
The last
It's been
decade.
a long time.
I mean, the change
15
is
years.
actually marketing. It's what I'm thinking.
Right, it changes
And-
marketing, but if you, right,
just-
my point is, I guess there's
But
an
if you're
opportunity
changing,
that you
then
miss.
take
If you're gonna
opportunity.
change the marketing,
And-
then at the same time, maybe change, enhance, and probably change the taste.
Okay. Well,
Because we're just talking-
Stability's a good taste.
Well, I think we're changing a taste too by saying that you.
And I'm not
you
knocking it,
apply
I'm just
to
trying to be clear about, make sure I understand kind of what our strategy is, because this is, I mean, we're at a point, I mean, this could be a strategic decision to kind of do both, or, yeah, we're just gonna kind of do this right here now, see how that works, and then take another step. So, I mean, I'm just trying to be clear. I'm not necessarily advocating for one or the other, like, hey, let's take this bold step and new Coke and new label and new brand and everything. I'm just saying, I just want to be clear on sort of what's the strategy. Because I'm hearing.
So currently, it would be same Coke with a campaign around,
To drink more.
have you forgotten about Coke? Look,
That's
it's great.
good,
It's a great
There you go.
I mean, you know, it's not about, it's not about the programming right now.
Polar bears.
What they're asking for is the calendar. So, and then, but we will keep an eye on what that
Baby
looks like and
giraffes.
what the individual school needs are within that may
Fair enough.
imply some other need.
And I don't
So
want to push,
Jonathan, I know, yeah.
I don't want to push board members if y'all aren't prepared to, you know, give feedback on it, but I do think that on page 4 of this, staff want to hear from, a couple of you have come down sort of opposed to the changes on converting the multi-track year-rounds to traditionals for the couple of those, and just wondering what other board members are interested in to try to give staff.
If I could try to start backwards.
Yes.
What I'm hearing from the table, generally speaking, and I'd like maybe, I guess, a thumbs up here, is to not make any changes to current multi-track year-round schools. That would be Salem Elementary, Salem Middle, Banks Road, or the recommendation for Alston Ridge Elementary. To just let those continue as are for now and not bring a recommendation to change their calendars.
Anybody have a concern with that?
Is there concern over banks? I mean, I don't know, we haven't really talked about banks very much as far as what data drove the decision for you to recommend us taking that to traditional? Was there supply,
Over 400
demand?
unused seats, plenty of multi-track choices in the area, and 2 new elementary schools coming online.
So do Banks and Salem have the same?
Yeah, I
Well,
don't
we have
know,
different
issues, I
No,
think.
they don't.
They're
Banks is
different.
a small, that many seats is a small elementary school. We have some that are almost that small.
Oh.
So I have problems with the Banks.
Yeah, I don't
and
hear
and
people wanting
And
to
my
take
question
Banks
about
off.
the Austin Ridge is if we do nothing to that, what does do nothing mean to the middle school? Does that mean it too would open up on year-round?
So
Right now, the middle school is set to open up on traditional.
Traditional.
We'd have a split count, so I'm not clear what the do nothing to Austin Ridge means.
what it means is that the Alston Ridge Elementary remains multi-track year-round, and the Alston Ridge Middle School is right now slated to open as a traditional middle school. If the board wants to have a discussion about doing something different with the middle school, we would include that as a part of our enrollment plan presentation.
What it means is have a Coke and a smile.
I am more set on the 2 Salems. I haven't looked at the
I mean, I was,
Austin Ridge at all.
what helped me visualize it, you know, way back in December, November, was having this kind of projection on how that would, you know, looking at what was then E50, but, you know, and what the effect would be, and if we could throw Carpenter into that and just see those projections, you know, with Alston Ridge, you know, just model it as a year-round, or if it were traditional, and I know they have a little bit of that in there, but
Austin
Would
Ridge
that
is a
be-
1920 decision. It's
Yeah.
another year out.
so
Okay, so we can bring you some more information during the enrollment plan
I would
about
appreciate that, thank
that.
you.
But I'm hearing a little something about banks Are you wanting to leave Banks on the table and take the Salems off? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think I'm hearing that,
I'm
yeah.
comfortable with banks going to traditional.
Okay.
Yeah, Banks going to traditional, but taking Salem off.
Okay.
Both Salems.
The challenge for Banks, Banks would be a 800 student school as a single track.
Banks would be Banks would be 894 as single track.
Okay, so they currently have 700 kids. The bigger challenge in that one, I think, is the opening of Bryan Road Middle.
That's right.
That's the assignment challenge moving forward, is the opening of Bryan Road Middle, which is also part of the discussion around taking the track 4 schools to traditional. So.
And Bryan Road is opening as
Traditional.
As traditional, okay.
So I kind of see that being part of the single track conversion discussion more than the multi-track, because she's right, we got Herbert Akins Middle that's in the plan to be built. It's on the same campus with a year-round elementary, but we haven't made a decision what his calendar would be.
Well, it's scheduled as traditional.
Right, scheduled as traditional.
Scheduled as traditional.
So I'm happy to take Banks Road out or leave Banks Road in. I defer to the rest of the board on that one.
I would too, I just wanted us to.
Okay. Banks Road to traditional. Are we okay with that? Okay,
Okay.
all right.
All right.
Salem's are out, Banks Road is in. Alston Ridge, we don't have to decide right now because that's a whole nother year out. Single track. Knowing that some of those are also related to some of the changes that we would have to make with year-round choices. Yes.
I got a question here. So we have Lockhart and Lake Myra, they're both track 4 now. So I assume that the Lockhart students would be offered to go to Lake Myra as the multi-track. Being that you have the 2 of them that are doing track 4, I'm certain everybody's going to say, I want track 4. So any idea of how many you would lose that would choose year-round at all because of not being able to get track 4 there?
Well, that's hard to tell. But we've had other schools like Alston Ridge who went from single track to multi-track. And so you start by seeing who is interested in moving, but then you have to go to moving. And if you do that early enough, families have the opportunity to choose something different.
All right, at Lockhart, if here, I'm going to assume that the track 4 is close to what it would be a traditional.
It's partially, it's track 4 and track 1 are the most closely aligned to traditional.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about the current population is probably close to what it would be traditional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a possibility that Lockhart would just stay the same and be on a different calendar.
Correct.
All right, the Carver change then. Now this being on the modified, it was moved to that, I'd say, for quite other reasons, and so now putting it onto traditional, that's.
It was moved to modified at a time when the modified calendar was a new option, and they were willing to take a chance because they thought it was a really good calendar. But the law changed where modified calendar is no longer even allowed, and so we've not been able to build any feeder patterns for Carver on a similar calendar in that eastern part of the county at all. So those children automatically, unless they happen to apply to a magnet school that one of our magnet schools that has a modified calendar, lose the option of calendar continuation when they go to middle school anyway.
But if you take that away now, then there's no chance of going back to that calendar.
That's correct.
That's right.
So you lose that option
That's correct.
completely. If you keep it, you have it.
At this time, that is correct.
I agree with that.
I am sad about that. That's sad.
And is Carver doing, do they have a robust track out program?
Who?
Carver?
No. None of our year-rounds right now really do much during the track out periods.
The single,
Single
whether
or
it's modified or
modified.
single track, they just don't
Correct. Well, and that's part of what we've talked about before, is like, when we talk about single track 4 in some of our ESM schools, it's not just the calendar. It is the programming, the additional resources, the after-school, what happens in intercession, which is not what's currently occurring in single track schools.
Yeah, I mean, we could belabor this all day, but, I mean, my concerns remain the same for the Garner Elementaries. I feel like putting that kind of pressure, given Timber is already a Title I focus, that we could potentially be creating an unhealthy school. So that's gonna remain a concern for me. And I know, Laura, you try to convince me that we'll keep it healthy, but it does make me very nervous.
Right.
I mean, when Timber was multi-track, they were healthy because the people who chose
Yeah, but their
multi-track.
demographics are not the same. Now, I mean, but the demographics that they would now be pulling from all of those schools that would make them multi-track aren't the same as when they were multi-track.
But that's assuming that everyone wants to leave their school, because the feedback from all the single track, the thing I hear over and over is how much they love their school, and they love what happens at that school. So it's like a family decision, where do you want to go? So we
Yeah,
may not have, we don't know for sure, but
We don't, but the reality is, because we don't know if it won't be an unhealthy school.
Right, and without the changes, you'll still experience disruption in a year there with Brian Roder. So.
I think we've got it. Right?
So the only calendar change that we would be bringing on May 2nd as of right now is Banks Road Elementary. I have not heard consensus on the single track 4. So unless, or there is consensus on single
Yeah, I
track
thought,
4.
on page 3, I thought that, so let's go back to
You
that.
have consensus, you just don't have me. But
I don't have you, but I
Oh, sorry.
I'm uncomfortable with the single track 4. I'm not sold one way or the other on it. I have a lot of sympathy for the, we're not gaining seats.
We are gaining seats at the elementary level.
Only through Timber, we're not getting.
Timber and Lake Myra.
Only
Timber
to
and
make a
Lake
couple
Myra. Timber and Lake
year
Myra.
round, right.
With the
But-
track 4, we're not getting.
But a single track
right.
year round and a traditional calendar give us equal number of seats.
Yes.
I get, even though it does not show its face in performance data, I get from both a teaching and a student perspective, the periodic breaks, the getting semester done before Christmas break, all of that is a positive. I get all of that. But I also hear in discussions with Kathy in particular, the number of students that we get that come in thinking that school starts in August when it starts in July, that has both a financial cost issue and a cost to the student issue. And I care very much about both of those issues. And the second issue that I care very much about is feeder, because if we have all these schools on track 4 at elementary school, then they go to middle school, they're all going to want to stay on the same track, or we're going to put families on split track. There's no way to accommodate that. So we've got the feeder pattern issue, and we've got the resource issue, and both of those two lean me in the direction of support. So I am physically torn, and I really do hear your concern, Monica, about the concern for Timber Drive. But those are my concerns. I'm not strong way on this decision.
Now, why aren't we doing intercessions at these schools where we?
It's additional
I know money,
resources.
yeah, there goes the money thing down.
And we're not going
I mean,
to
I
budget.
do know that, I get that, but I thought, have we talked, yeah, I guess you've talked about it a lot. I just hadn't heard.
We had a program for intercession many years ago.
Yeah.
But it was not targeted. The school preference, the participation wasn't great. The school preference at that time was, when we moved middle schools towards a team concept, was to redirect those resources from intercession to a teaming model for the regular instructional periods.
Okay.
So,
And we are doing extra resources at our ESM schools that are on.
yes, they have additional resources that they're using to do the intercession
not
program.
any-
Okay, so one more time, I need a thumbs up or down on the single track 4 that include Lake Myra and Timber going to multi-track year round.
Recognizing it's not a final vote and it would come for action, but this is so that
May
staff
2nd,
has
correct.
direction.
So in favor of the
Sending the single track to
traditional and the
right.
2
Yes.
single tracks to multi-track.
Bottom of page 3.
Plus Banks.
And then, well, I'm just talking about these right now.
Okay.
Okay?
You want them-
All right, thank you.
And Banks.
Yeah, and then Banks, and then Banks have separate, I think in Banks, most of it would be, I think there are more thumbs up for
Yes.
Banks.
And we're hearing move forward with the changes in the application process.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, I think somebody took my notes away from me and didn't give back to me. You have? Oh, forget them. Okay, thanks.
Okay, just give you a brief recap on where we are with the budget. We brought the budget. Ready? We brought the budget to the board 2 weeks ago and asked for any questions to be sent to Terry Kimsey. She has received questions. We have several to answer tonight. We have another potential work session next week if needed. And then on May 2nd, we will bring the budget to the board for approval due to the fact that we have to get the budget to the county commissioners by May 15th. So that's sort of the schedule of where we're at. We loaded all the questions into Assembly this afternoon, so you should have access to all the questions, and those questions will be out in Assembly and also on the internet for public view tonight and tomorrow morning. So we don't have a great way of going through these questions other than reading the questions and answers. That's what we've done in the past few years, and so that's what we're going to attempt to do tonight. So I'll turn it over to Terry and let her start with these questions.
Okay, the first several questions have to do with the class size issue that Dr. Merrill addressed earlier. So you'll see question 1 has lots of parts, A, B, C, D, E, et cetera. And the questions may have come from different board members and some came from county commissioners, and so those are all intermingled. We kind of grouped like questions together. So the first one is, the state says they have provided the funding for reduced class size. If we had music, art, and PE before the state started to provide additional funding to reduce class sizes in 2011, why would we need to cut those teachers now if we implemented the reduced class sizes? So we did want to state that the superintendent's proposed budget does not recommend a cut to art, music, or PE. The superintendent's budget does estimate a total cost to fund additional elementary classroom teachers without eliminating elementary art, music, and PE at 462 teachers, or a cost of $26 million. The superintendent's proposed budget includes a request for half of that need, which is $13 million, with hopes that the General Assembly will address this statewide. We also described the history of how those allotments were combined, which Dr. Merrill covered in his presentation. If the funding provided to accomplish the reduced class size was not sufficient to staff the additional classes to meet the reduced class size, why was that not addressed at the time? DPI publishes a school attendance and student accounting manual, which prescribes how we're to monitor class size. And for several years, that manual says that class size maximums should not exceed 1 to 21 LEA-wide in K-3, and the size of an individual class may exceed the LEA-wide ratio by 3 students. So an individual class can have up to 24 students in K-3, as long as district-wide we don't exceed the average of 21. And that's been in place for many years. And school districts in North Carolina follow those procedures, so there was nothing to be addressed as long as districts followed the procedures prescribed in the manual.
Terry, quick question on that. when we get these kind of ratios, the state provides some MOE, the county provides some MOE. We have ratios based on putting everybody, at the school level, you don't care whether the dollars came from the state or came from the county, and that tells how many kids are in the classroom. So when we get these kind of numbers dictated from DPI or the state, is that state allocated positions? Is that total allocated positions? If the state doesn't give us enough money to do X, are we then required to make it up by county?
Yeah, there's different formulas. That's a good question. The state does have formulas for allotting resources to the district. In 4 major categories, those are position allotments, as Mr. Fletcher described. And then others, they're dollar allotments. And I'll describe in a few minutes how we use that flexibly within allowances within state law. In addition, we do have teachers that are on our local budget. Our funding formulas are not by fund. Our funding formulas are how we roll out different types of teachers to schools, and then we manage that across all the resources available to us. In particular, for class size, for classroom teacher, we do use all of the funds that DPI allots to us for classroom teacher, for both the classroom teacher in the classroom and the specials we've been describing, art, music, PE, dance, drama, and instructional resource teachers. And we put a few more positions than the state allots for that. So that allotment of resources does go for those type teachers and nothing else.
And so all of this works reasonably well if we've got some kind of flexibility. But if we now have a mandated, thou shalt have this class size, and we no longer have that flexibility, is that saying the state can mandate the class size that the county therefore has to make up?
I don't think they are stating that the county has to make that up. I believe that they are
But if there aren't-
indicating the
but if there
district
aren't
must meet
resources-
that class size, and then we have to make choices, and some of those options were in the presentation earlier.
Including
Of
choices at
options
different
that
grade
the
levels.
system would need to consider.
Well, let me try it another way. Regardless of what source is paying for the teacher, class size cannot exceed X. But we're the ones behind the scenes who decide this one will be state, this one will be local, and that's constantly changing. If we had no local funding, then we would probably be robbing from the upper grades if they were all state positions, because we'd have nowhere else to go, and we'd be loading the elementaries. That gets at it.
Right.
What you
No,
were asking.
I mean, basically, the more, if they give us flexibility, then they can't say, then we can't say it's clearly unfunded mandate. If they say it shall be this, they're basically saying, you've got to do this, whether we give you the money for it or not.
Well, even if it's
But
unfunded,
if-
we're gonna have to do it.
I hate to take that position, but they could say, but you can move teachers from other grades to
Okay.
comply with the K-3 size, all state funded.
But then we look at our high schools where kids are sitting in windowsills.
Pretty much.
I didn't say it was a good.
No. Yeah, just wanted to clarify what these
Yeah,
numbers
that's
meant.
right. So one thing I'm gonna say, just in the interest of time, Ms. Kinsey, I could tell you were very focused, and so I was trying to wait for you to breathe. So there are several pieces that we did go over that, for the sake of time, we won't repeat, but I think it is important for board members who have very specific questions, that those questions be asked. But since it's already 4:41, we're not gonna delve we're not gonna repeat all the things that we heard Dr. Merrill said, which are quite a few of your
Yeah, I think you could even
letters.
skip to E.
But I'm gonna, okay, and I'm gonna let Ms. Hartenstein answer her
Okay.
question while you look at that. Are you ready?
Terry, does DPI in their manual define classroom teacher?
Yes, I believe they do. I don't have that in front of me, but I would have to go look.
Later.
I believe it. I did want to call attention to E on this first question, because Philip Price did have an article that was excellent on WREX
Excellent.
on the 13th, and we provided the link to that. It provides the history. So from 2011-12 forward, it does show those allotments to the districts, and it also reminds people of the negative reserve, that even though we were allotted resources, we did have to give back millions of dollars, and each district had to decide how to do that. And then in 2013-14, the LE adjustment was removed and it became more specific. But that is a good history provided to you. And at the bottom of page 3 on the Q&A, it does show the history of the allotments for classroom teachers. Item G, and we'll go past this topic, but it does address more of the facility issues that we discussed, and some of that was in Dr. Merrill's presentation, if you want to look at those. Are the additional classrooms in the 7-year capital plan? No, they were not included in the 7-year capital plan. So if we want to go past that topic, we'll go to question number 2, which is also for page 3, regarding state funding of growth. What is the additional amount included in this request for student growth? So there is, on page 14 and 17 of the superintendent's proposed budget, it specifically shows the cost for growth, state, local, and federal. A total of $25 million, $16 million is that is state, $8.8 million local, and $89,000 federal. At the top of page 6 on your Q&A, it shows the detailed business cases that make up those figures. Has the state provided this growth funding in recent years? Yes, and the superintendent's proposed budget assumes they will continue to do so. What is the likelihood that they will do so this year? We do not know. That's up to the General Assembly to decide, but we are assuming that they will do so. We have also listed this as a potential risk in your document in case that were not to happen. What is the impact if it doesn't happen? Well, the $16 million of resources we expect from the state for growth is the risk. Question 3, page 4, is a question about the transfers to and from different programs. Each year, the state law allows flexibility to districts. Once the allotments come to the district in the different categories, for position allotments, for dollar allotments, we then have flexibility on how we use those resources. And to just describe it generally, it's in the best interest of the school system to take the total dollar allotments for categories like limited English proficiency, academically gifted, some of the allotment for at-risk that goes to teachers, to convert all of that money from those categories to general money to pay salaries for teachers and non-certified staff, because many of the teachers in those programs are very experienced and are paid not at the beginning levels of our pay scales. So we put those teachers on our position allotments, as Mr. Fletcher described, where it does not matter if the person is paid at top of scale or lower on the scale. The state covers the cost as long as we use those months. So we are able to use our resources in a much greater capacity by doing these conversions from one category to another each year. We're still providing dollars for those programs. We're still using the dollars, more than the state dollars for those programs. In all of these areas, we have local funds that supplement that. So that's why we do the changes each year, because we can gain more use of our resources. And there's a description of that. It's pretty lengthy on page 7 and 8. Question 4 relates to page 5. Has the local percent share of the total's budget shifted to or from local support in the last decade? If so, what's been the shift in the share, and who saw the offset share change? So if you look at the bottom of page 9 on the answers, we've provided a history back until 2007-8, and you'll see the fluctuations for the past 10 years. And you'll see primarily the changes occurred between state and federal during the economic downturn. Question 5 relates to page 12 of the budget. Would it be possible to provide a breakout of square footage table into decades of age of building square footage since the last major renovation? Generally, older square footage is more costly to maintain and operate, so we have provided that information to you in the response. Question 6 relates to page 15 in the budget. Are the deferred items really needed and required to provide excellent public education, or are they a wish list that would be nice if there were unlimited resources available? The $200 million deferred list seems to come back each year, never allowing us to fully fund what is required for great public education. It seems to me hard to raise taxes 3 years in a row and still be looking at huge unfunded deferred needs. Is that realistic? The total of the deferred items is actually $137.9 million. The grand total on those pages shows the $137.9 million added to the request in the superintendent's budget to arrive at that $200 million figure. But the deferred needs list is actually $137.9 million. They are not a wish list. These are priorities that are deferred at the time, pending funding. We may be able to fund some of the one-time costs during the year from special projects funding or one-time savings that may occur. And the deferred needs list does show the difference between recurring cost and one-time. Most of the requests are recurring in nature. Those will remain on the deferred needs list until a recurring revenue stream is available. And there are a few items on that deferred needs list that are priorities we are phasing in over a multiple year period, and those are noted. Is the deferred needs $200 million one time or ongoing? And as I mentioned, that is separated out on the pages. Question 7 is just an editing issue that we will revise in the next book. Question 8, pages 43 to 46, ask about the revenue source and what is the purpose of several of the different items listed. School connectivity is a state source. The state pays school connectivity. It's the non-discounted portion of E-rate. The purpose is to provide district-wide communication, and we've noted that the business case with more information is on page 159. Community schools is a local source. The revenue source comes almost exclusively from community rentals of school space. The purpose is to provide a way for community groups to use our school facilities at a price that covers the expenses of the rental, and there's also reference to the business case. Summer camp is a local source. The revenues are generated by student fees. We've got 5 or 6 schools that offer a summer camp program and charge tuition for that. The fees are collected to pay for the teachers and other staff that work the program and the cost of the camp. Parents as teachers, Smart Start, that is a local source of funding to our district. We applied for and received a grant from Smart Start to implement an evidence-based home visiting program. And we've also referenced a business case on page 185. A question about, question 9, references pages 49 and 50 in the document. A description of new positions indicated by the budget increase. So those particular pages are object code pages that show fluctuations in costs from year to year. And I just wanted to point that on pages 57 to 61, it shows changes in staff, which is probably better pages to look at if you're looking for which positions are being added or deleted each year. But we have noted for the particular ones that were requested for more information, for example, Central Services Administrator, page 49, we've indicated the reference to the business case of positions being added. The only positions being added from state or local funds is a request to add resources to the Office of Equity Affairs, which is a director position. The other 2 administrator and senior administrator positions are things that are specified within a grant that will become. Monitor, those are safety assistants positions, and there's a reference to that business case. Office support, those positions are the secretarial support for our new schools, and it's also a lead secretary for Connections Alternative School, and lead secretary and student data manager for the SCORE school. Administrative support, there are no new positions in that line. If you look at the object code page, there is a change in cost. That's primarily because there were some vacancies this year that were vacant for a period of time, and we recouped the lapsed salaries, but now they're filled, so next year we show the full salaries in that line item. Skilled trades, those positions are a facility maintenance technician and an integrated pest management master craftsman. The manager positions that are being added are the child nutrition managers at schools that are opening. And a question about curriculum development pay, that's not positions, but it is dollars that are paid to some of our staff, some of our teachers that do work for us writing curriculum outside their typical employment term. So it may be at night, weekends, track out, summer. Question 10, how is the increase in utilities calculated? The current average budget per square foot times that additional square footage being added, plus any system-wide rate increases from utility companies. Is there no propane gas? Propane is included under fuel for facilities. Does mobile communications include anything other than cellular phones? It does include a small amount for a tablet support, with the majority of the funding covering cellular phones. Is security monitoring services covered by a different code? It is included in our contract security services. What are items included in membership dues and fees? The majority of the memberships are system-wide, such as the American Association of School Administrators, North Carolina School Board Association, Central Carolina RESA, and the International Baccalaureate. What are assessments and penalties that are paid or anticipated to be paid? Those include the NC Turnpike Authority for the NC Quick Pass for school system vehicles, elevator inspections, and permits from other regulatory agencies. What is fuel for facilities? That includes fuel, oil, and propane. The next question is about page 66. What is the historic allocation of teaching assistants, perhaps back to 2008? We've provided the history back to 2010-11 because that's the data that I had available. And we've included a chart that shows the initial allotment, and you'll see that for each year. And then several lines down, you'll see LEA adjustment discretionary reduction. In those first few years, remember when we were talking about the state allotted resources to us and then say you have to pay some back as a district? Our district chose to use some of our teaching assistant funds to pay some of those resources back. So in 2010-11 through 2012-13, you see that even though we may have received an allotment over $50 million, in 2 of those years, we returned $20 million of that allotment to the state as part of the discretionary reduction. We've also provided
TAs, do we get as dollars or MOEs?
dollars. And currently, the allotment for teaching assistants is restricted to be used for that purpose. They no longer give us flexibility to convert that to teachers as we have had in the past. Yeah.
I was going to say, it was this academic year that the conversion funds were no longer available.
It was 2 years ago. Yeah. So we provided the formulas there also that the state used to allot the resources to us for each of those years.
And it's important to note here, I think, that these are not figured into the class size bill. Because if we go down to 1 to 18, the formula changes, which says we have to have more TAs, but we didn't get money for more TAs.
We did not get more, yeah. There is no money recommended to increase the number of TAs. So if we are required to comply with the class size, so we would have more K-3 classes and the same number of teaching assistants, they would be spread much thinner than they are today.
But if we have the allotment of teaching assistants per class or per student, right? Because isn't the allotment X number of?
But they use a denominator of 21. The state formula
Okay.
says that you assume, for mathematical purposes, that you use a denominator of a class size of 21 for K-3, and then they allot so many TAs per grade, and it differs for each grade. So they are not recommending to change that denominator based on the other legislation.
More resources out of the classroom.
At the same time, they're not recommending to increase it either.
Right. The
Yeah.
reality of having that body in the classroom
Yeah.
is critical, particularly at this age.
Net effect of fewer TAs, the class size, HB 13 passed, you have those fewer TAs for more classrooms.
Right. One question was what is needed for teaching assistants? And we don't have a definite answer on that. The way we've chosen to answer it is that if one teaching assistant were provided for each K-3 classroom, and if the number of classrooms is determined by the ratio of 1 to 21, which is what the state formula is now, then we would need an additional 1,175 teaching assistants at 9.3 months of employment, or 10,927 months of employment, and it would cost $35 million. That's if we were to have one teaching assistant per K-3 classroom. If we also wanted to add a teaching assistant in grades 4 and 5, we would need an additional 1,217 teaching assistants beyond what we just discussed, an additional $36 million beyond the $35 million. Question 14, the combined state and local funding for instructional supplies is $68 per student. That lack of support is why parents have to spend so much on their children's instructional supplies, and supplies contributed to the classroom, thus creating an equity issue for more and less wealthy families. How does the budget address the concern of classroom teachers not having enough resources to buy supplies required for their classroom? So we've provided you with a chart that shows you the allotment funding formulas back to 2011-12. So in 2011-12, it was $85 per student. and that then remained flat at $71.04 for a number of years, and now it's, the last 2 years, $68 per student. And we have not calculated a need, but a first step would be to try to restore it to the previous values.
17 times 160,000.
And these resources are allotted to schools, but they are not used only for classroom materials. It's the operating budget that the principal uses for their schools. So it may pay for their copier cost, it may pay for printing, it may pay for their cellular
Right.
phone bills and other things. It's not strictly for supplies. The next question, 15 is about page 69. Bus drivers, I understand this is a growth page. We were told during bell schedule discussion that the system needs 12 more drivers for Apex, 6 more for Forest Pines. So what's the level of growth positions needed versus what's included in the superintendent's budget? So there's a breakdown provided that shows the purpose of the business case is to show the number of additional bus drivers needed if we were fully staffed with drivers today and to open the schools in 17-18. So you'll see we currently have 760 routes. 83 drivers are needed to eliminate the first tier shared runs. 7 drivers are needed for Apex High School swing space. And 28 drivers are needed for the new school openings in 17-18, which is a total of 878. So we have currently 850 funded and 28 are on the business case request.
Right.
So that's how that was arrived at.
And that 12 came from, if we were to maintain the bell schedule at its current academic schedule, that's where the 12 came from. By moving it, it dropped down to 7.
What would be the estimated cost of a 2-tier bus system, and what would that mean for high school start times? The answer depends largely on the amount of time between the 2-tier start times. For example, if we started the first tier at 7:30 and the second at 8:30, we would need to add approximately 400 buses. With more time in between the tiers, we would be able to reduce that figure. The estimated cost would be roughly $950,000 for drivers and $30 million for new buses.
Well, the drivers though would not get 30 hours. So we take them off of benefits and make the position less attractive.
And the 7:30 and 8:30 are not start times that deal with the time start that we
No,
need.
but that's just an example.
No, right.
Pick any hour. Yeah.
Next question.
The number goes up though if we move it later because of traffic, because the time to do a route is higher at 8:30 than it is at 7:30.
Extra duty, is this normal extra duty functions found in all elementary schools? And yes, these are normal funds required to open new schools is what's included on page 69. Page 70, career and technical education, are all of these months state funded? Yes, all of our career and technical teachers are state funded. We've already talked about how utilities are calculated. There was a question that LP and oil usage in new schools looks questionable on page 70. The business case for new school square footage used to be separated. The information is now consolidated under one case. For purposes of allocating funding to utility budget codes, the approach has been to show the distribution based on current percentages. Each of the categories fluctuate from year to year based on the facility usage and weather conditions. Adjustments are made as needed. Since 2009-10, the district has added 2.6 million square feet, and the utility funding is $2 million less. Question 19 is about page 70, academic teachers. What does this fund as compared to past allocations? Trying to understand. So this is talking about the specials, the art, music, dance, drama, PE. And we've provided to you some information that shows each of those categories and what our allotment formulas are to schools. So that is about a page in your answers that you can read through and see what those funding formulas are that we use for the principals. Next question, page 70, instrument repair. How much is actually needed? $1,000 per school per year seems inadequate. We have not researched the actual need for instrument repair. We know that it varies based on the average age of the instrument, so older schools may have older instruments in need of repair. Additionally, some schools may have parent booster organizations. particularly at high school, that support this need, but many schools do not. Page 76, textbooks. Do we have an estimated cost for textbooks and digital textbooks to fully support K-12 instructional resources? We do have a deferred need list for $4 million. An increase of $14 to $19 million would yield an annual recurring budget of $20 to $25 million to allow all content areas to be placed on a 4 to 5 year rotation for adoption of textbooks and to fund annual recurring cost of supplementary materials and consumables. There was a question about the driver's education calculation on the business case. The calculation does include private, charter, and homeschool numbers. We track historical participation and use that to project the budget. So we're strictly looking at the projected count of students at 9th grade. And any resources we receive from the state for driver's education can only be used for driver's education. So this doesn't really impact any other part of the budget.
And that's a typo, she said 2020 instead of 2010, after 2019?
Yes.
Okay.
So we've got a 1 year dip in 2018.
The next question is about Grad Point. Please explain the outcomes expected from this investment. Grad Point provides an intervention and remediation services for identified students to complete requirements for graduation. Grad Point provides opportunities for students to retake courses in which they did not receive a passing grade, or to take courses required for graduation that may not be otherwise available to the student, or to receive additional support for courses in which they're having difficulty. A certified teacher provides management for the program and support for the students. Primary customers are seniors who need a credit to graduate, and there's a state requirement that we provide this course at no cost to these students, and we use state at-risk funds for the program. We use local dollars to pay the supplement for the teacher. In question 24, page 80, it's remarkable to me that each ESL teacher has on average 70 to 110 limited English proficient students. It's amazing they can provide the extent of individual attention given those extreme ratios. We agree that ratios need to be addressed and see the response to this next question. The next question is the level of funding sufficient for students to become proficient English readers? What funding level would be needed to assure adequate vocabulary acquisition to succeed? We have not determined a dollar amount for preparation of all teachers of English learners to ensure the English learners access core instruction and the partner need for additional LEP teacher months. It's a strand that cuts across MTSS, literacy, academics, counseling, special education, and intervention. ESL teachers in Title III program components are designed to support the district and school structures while addressing English learners' need to learn the academic language of schooling while simultaneously achieving academically, which includes but is much more complicated than vocabulary acquisition. We continue to focus on teaching academic language students needed to fully participate in rigorous learning experiences, assessing and documenting second language development, and collaborating across all the departments to build capacity for the English learners. In addition, Wake County Schools provide language supports services to English learners so they have access to grade level instruction in all areas during the school day, strategic scheduling and professional learning opportunities for teachers of English learners focused on helping teachers facilitate meaningful interaction for frequent language practice. And it supports the school-wide approach. Page 82. 1 month per 50 students to cover an instructional resource teacher in the arts means that a full-time teacher is expected to serve more than 500 students. This is a 5 to 100 student bands, choruses, or dance classes per teacher. Clearly, this does not provide all children with a modest exposure to these disciplines. This allocation supplements the ADM formula. Schools also use months of employment from their classroom teacher formula to fund those positions. And I think this page number may be looking at the middle school level. Page 83, appears to be a gap between formula and actual. Caseloads do remain higher than we would like, and if needed, we hire contract support for the program. Page 85, I see this as a counterpoint to the 104 months on the deferred list. Is this true? Yes, the request is for 38.49. The need is 142.55. The difference is 104 on the deferred needs list.
This is MOE 4?
Yes.
Do we know, or we have to look it up? We can look it up.
Yeah.
What's
Look it up.
Don't worry about it right now. We can
It's
look it
104
up. but
months, yeah.
You might want to
We'll add months on there.
modify your response. We know what
Sure.
we're saying.
That was about occupational therapy.
This is OTs.
Yes. Pages 85 to 90 and 93. The request is for state allotment of additional occupational therapist positions. Is this a guaranteed allotment or a request to DPI? If it's not funded by the state, then will this become a local request? And alternatively, if this is a formula allotment from the state, then why did we get so far behind? Same question for the physical therapist, special education, and speech language pathologist. State funding for special education teachers, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and speech language pathologists flows to the district as combined funding. So it is a dollar allocation. Regardless of allotment formulas, the funding per student in special education has remained the same since 1996. This, of course, does not take into account the increased number of students, increased need for staffing given the complexity of large number of students served in Wake County school system, or increases in salary. Additional funding in local is requested when state and federal funds do not cover growth in students and programming.
Terry, would you read that second sentence again?
Regardless of allotment formulas, funding per student funding in special education has remained the same since 1996.
And the source of most of that funding is?
Special education receives state, local, and federal resources.
Okay.
The state would be the larger portion, but they do have
Those are
every
such
type of funding.
So to be clear, we get an allotment formula,
For so many.
but we don't get dollars based on the allotment formula.
I know.
We do
I
get
know,
we
right,
get a
but-
dollar allotment formula for exceptional children's program. In addition, we pay for special education teachers from other allotment categories. We pay for some of our special education teaching assistants from our teaching assistant allotment category. We have locally funded exceptional children's positions and contract dollars and supplies, and we have federal resources also. So there's a myriad of
Help me
funding.
understand that. The allotment says we get one position per
No,
218 students.
The
We're not getting that
The
level of
allotment
dollars.
is a dollar allotment. So it has a basis for how it's calculated, but it does not come to us as positions. The dollar value.
The dollar, that's been unchanged since 1996.
And the way we manage in Wake County school system is we take the most experienced, higher on the pay scale, special education teachers, and we'll put them on the classroom teacher allotment. Use that dollar value allotment for other special education needs. We try to use all of our state resources, if we can, for people, and pay for non-personnel on other funding.
Okay. That's just remarkable to see that there's been no change since 1996.
Who do you think's costing more?
That was, the feds are the same way.
Page 94, counselors, is there any opportunity to adjust the allocation based on the level of need in the building? Examining the level of need in a building will be incorporated. Staff is working on an acuity model, reviewing the allocation of current resources and how to allocate the additional resources that may be received. On an initial read, it's confusing that the state provides one per 218.55 positions for certified instructional personnel. And then there's more detail in the case. The answer is the allotment is used for counselors, social workers, locally funded nurses, and all media specialist positions. So the state funding formula supports a variety of instructional support positions.
So it's really 0.25 per 218.55.
They aren't in equal distribution, but.
Well, and there's actually some
something like that.
psychologists thrown in there too.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's a lot less than one
Yeah,
per 218.
it's 1 to 800 and something to fill four different,
Categories.
yeah.
Page 97, which is benchmark assessments for elementary support model schools. I have a sense from parents and teachers there's an excess of assessment that detracts from learning and teaching. Thus, before expanding this quarterly benchmark assessment, do we have strong evidence that it provides greater value? We're not adding more assessments. This case is money for printing for the test booklets. In the current year, we neglected to include a budget for that and have had to use another resource for that. So there's not a difference in the terms, there's not a difference in the terms or number of assessments from what we had last year. It's catching up with the cost for that. The next one's the same question about it being over 100%, and it's just the printing of the textbook. Pages 98 and 107, which is talking about SchoolWire's content management system. How does SchoolWire's and the intranet business cases relate? Much of the language in the two cases seems to be the same. SchoolWire's is software that we use for public internet access that places all schools in the districts on the same web platform. The intranet business case funds a secure internal website that serves only employees. Page 98, is this a software purchase? And is this an ongoing annual subscription? This is also about SchoolWire's. SchoolWire's is a subscription service that places all schools and the district on the same platform. It greatly improves the security and reliability of the school websites throughout the system. Page 99, exceptional children's contractors. Are they paid additional funds for picking up the safety assistance required for transporting the special needs children? No, per the contract, vendors are required to pick up the safety assistant when a safety assistant is required for a child at no additional cost to Wake County School System. Page 100, which is K2 literacy coaches. What state funding is provided for the K2 literacy coaches? The state does not provide a designated funding for the coaches, but there is flexibility to use the teacher allotment for this purpose. The flexibility will be restricted with the changes in class size. Current funding is primarily through special education funding designated for early intervention. Page 101 is North Wake College and Career Academy. While I strongly support the North Wake College Career Academy, it's important to consider the cost associated with the small schools model. Here we're informed of the need of 40 months or 4 teachers to support electives, plus 10 months for PBL in addition to the regular allotment. Given the regular allotment of 1 teacher per 27.47 high school students, this means the 400 student school requires 34% more teachers than a larger high school receiving the same allotment. The allotment is front-loaded as the school grows. It will be reviewed as student enrollment increases to determine if this allotment can be redirected to the regular classroom allotment. It is correct that cooperative innovative high schools have additional costs because of their size and their programming. Page 103 are positions previously funded by the Magna Grant. Why are the same number of months being shifted from federal grant to local dollars coming in at a lower cost? This is because we budget local on an average salary. However, when we assign teachers to state-funded positions, we move the higher-paid teachers to those positions, and the differential is what we were actually paying when using Magna Grant funds versus budgeting on the average salary. So once we realize we need to pick up the teachers with local funding, where those teachers are actually paid will depend on their experience level. Did these positions exist prior to the federal grant, 2014? They did not. The grant allows us to include some positions, but most of it goes to programming, training, supplies, and materials. A few positions will be included in the grant proposal with the understanding that when the grant ends, an alternative funding stream has to be used to continue those positions. And only a portion of the grant positions funded by the grant are being requested to move to local. Page 109 is about real estate leases. And it's a question about Wake County paying taxes on some of our leases. Wake County School System does not pay the taxes directly to Wake County. Taxes are assessed to the property owner. The property owner pays the taxes, and it's standard practice on commercial leases to pass through the property taxes to the lessee. And then we've provided a chart that shows that information. Page 110, which is the Crossroads 1 and 2 real estate leases. What's the long-term capital plan for central services? Our current lease for Crossroads location expires in 2025. It has 2 5-year extensions. Page 112, Future Teachers Program. Are recipients that teach outside Wake County required to repay? Teachers in the Future Teachers Program who do not fulfill the 3-year teaching commitment in Wake County School System agree to repay the district. Page 116 and 117 it's talking about the two cases in the document that show inflationary cost and asking if other inflation is absorbed into the budget, and it is. Departments and schools absorb inflationary adjustments within their base budgets, because you see how many business cases that we need just for growth and other items, so we do not request inflationary adjustments.
But it's important to recognize that growth
It
and
is.
inflation are two very different things. And we just don't deal with it. We pretend inflation doesn't exist for the most part.
We make it up in volume.
No, we don't. We just cut.
Page 120 is charter schools, and there are a number of questions about the charter schools. There's a $6.8 million increase in local spending to charter schools. How many charter school students enroll in Wake County system after the 20th and 40th day, after enrollments, and that determine how much the state and local funding they receive. So we've provided information showing the numbers of charter school students and how we pay funds to those, how local funds are paid to the charter schools. And it's important to know that the student information depends on the following conditions. The numbers are dependent on the data managers entering the data accurately. If the transfer process in Power School accurately transfers the data, duplicate student records, which is a known issue in charter schools, and only includes students in a charter school this year and who were then enrolled in a Wake County school after the 20th and 40th day. So we do receive requests monthly from charter schools for their local payment due. We do look at that data, and then we calculate each month the amounts due to those. Do charter school students lose funding when they lose students after that time? They do lose funding, since they're recalculating that each month. How do funds flow to charter schools? On page 20 of your responses, we've described how local funds are provided to charter schools. It includes our county appropriation, tuition for out-of-county students, ROTC, miscellaneous fees, rebates, and outside agency refunds for substitute teachers. Those funding sources are used to calculate the local amount due to charters. State funds are done differently, and the state pays resources directly to charters. So we've shown which categories are included for that calculation, and then they receive funding from the state in 3 installments. So the first is equal to 34% of their initial allotment. The second is also 34%, which is adjusted after the first month average daily membership. And then their third allotment, which is 32%, is allotted prior to March 31st. So they receive 3 installments rather than monthly, as they do from local.
So do I understand under the state funds, that if eligible head count for LEP, the charter school would get those LEP funds only if they have LEP students? Is that correct?
That's what's indicated in the state.
But the children with disabilities is irrespective of whether they're educating children with disabilities?
Yes, this was directly from the state website, showing how they distribute the resources, and that's how I read it.
But as far as you understand it,
Yes,
that's how
as
you
far
read
as I
it?
understand it, yes.
So they can get dollars for services not provided?
So Terry, when you finish up the last federal funding of charter, I'm gonna ask board members if they have any questions for the remainder.
That'd be great. I think you can go ahead. The federal just describes how they receive funds based on targeted student populations.
Okay. So given the time, if you have questions that you want Terry to expand on this list, we still have over 8 pages of Q&A left. So we'll allow you to entertain any questions that board members want to directly ask you at this time. Specifically for those of you who have a question that hasn't been touched upon yet. Mr. Fletcher?
I had, on page 134, the academics allocation of K-8 intervention. 0 to 34% of the ADM. Is that how that's calculated?
No, that's percent, 0 to 34% of their population is identified as at risk.
Then they would get
they get 5 months if they're a traditional calendar, or 5.5 months
If
if
they're
it's
multi-track
multi-track
calendar.
around.
Okay, all right.
Very thorough.
Any other questions?
So I guess the question to you is do you want another board work session? We have time available next Tuesday. And if you do want that, you want us to take another round of questions based on the answers you've received here and what we will need to bring for the following Tuesday. You tell us.
So given that we did cut the time short to Mark's point, we reserve time next week for a follow-up if folks felt the need after this one. So if you'll tell me by show of thumbs if you absolutely know now that you want to keep the time for next week. So thumbs up if you want to keep next week.
Yeah, I think we can keep it. I mean, I feel like we haven't had any discussion over any of these ideas.
So the next
It's-
part is, what would you like to see there? The first is, do you want to keep it? He had 2 questions. And the second is, what do you want to see there?
Well, we have
We have public comment tonight, too.
Yes, we do.
We have 8 more pages here, and we're still getting questions.
That's right.
Yes, no.
Yeah.
So there's still more to be asked and answered, at the very least, in addition to.
But at some level, we have to
opportunity discuss.
decide, you know, do we just, is this done? Or do we want to make any changes?
Yes, we do. I mean, so the second part of his question, which you're still getting questions, do you have a timeline that you want board members to have those final questions in for you by next Tuesday?
Well, for this week, we had Thursday night of last week. Does that work? Is that best for you?
Does that
So
work
if we
by the
could
end
get
of Thursday?
any additional questions by Thursday night of this week into business,
So by night, you mean into business day?
into business.
Terry, you're doing a good job, Terry.
Yes, hang in there, thank
Had
you.
lots of help.
We appreciate it.
Everybody.
And we also
And
acknowledge.
staff, everybody.
We also acknowledge that the questions aren't just coming from us either.
These are awesome.
So we'll make that known at the end of business Thursday. Mr. Tate.
Just, I guess, process-wise, we have Dr. Merrill or financial staff, what's helpful for you in terms of next, I mean, once we get the answer to the question, if it's, I mean, in the past, we've kind of gone through this exercise, okay, if there's something that you want to see cut or move or whatever, then, all right, then where's it come from?
Yeah.
So,
Sounds about right.
so,
You know, a week from tonight, you know, and it's an open night, so I mean, we can schedule as much time as we want there, because it's the only reason we're meeting next Tuesday night. So the Q&A should be done by then. If board members prior to then, and that would help us if we got this by Thursday night also, if you were saying, can we squeeze something in and cut something out? If you're doing that, I would ask you to recommend what you would offset with, or you're just saying, let's reduce by X, boom, you know, and we'll do that. But I think unless you're asking us to mix and match, I think it really becomes the board's discussion at that point, starting next Tuesday night, and then even the following week would be the following meeting would be sort of the last time when we need you to just tell us what your bottom line is. Because that's the first meeting in May, and we've got to get it across town by the 15th, so.
yeah, so I just want to kind of walk through that
Yeah.
process, particularly for the new board members,
Okay.
how we do that. That you can propose a cut, but it's got to come from within somewhere, and just how we.
We would appreciate that.
So-
Did I go too fast on that?
We've
for
cut
new
balance
board?
proposals.
I got it.
Increases have to come from somewhere.
You call it what you want.
Yeah.
I'm not doing nomenclature, just let the process it.
So to clarify, we'll meet next week. Please have your last questions in. Please tell all your colleagues to have their last questions in as well by close of day business. We actually move it into Thursday, not Thursday night at midnight. So that staff, I want to be very clear, so staff has opportunity to answer those questions. And then Dr. Merrill, I also hear you saying, don't just save those things if you already know where you want to propose some changes. Don't save those till next Tuesday. Go
Yeah.
ahead and submit those as well.
Yeah, if you've got some proposals, we need to try and do an impact analysis to the extent possible. So that would be helpful if you're ready by Thursday night, yeah. Yeah.
Good. Now, did that make sense? Sorry, you did go super fast over the picture. Okay, all right. Okay, so I think board members have what they're supposed to do, and staff will be able to work the rest of their magic. Just a few days to do that before next Tuesday. Thank you all for taking the leadership. We do recognize all the staff help to make sure that we get on these answers. Thank you all for your patience of a long work session. And please note, there is no mean time to next week when we talk about.
So what?
No end time to next week's budget session.
Check in, but you can't check out.
Right, exactly.